She had a boundless spirit that soared above her life circumstances.
She was an amazing young woman, full of life, charismatic, friendly.
She's figuring out how to navigate what life looks like as a single mother.
She tried to counsel others with their problems, even though she had her own.
Until the sounds of sirens pierced a quiet autumn morning.
She was assaulted.
He left her tied up.
This is just a tragedy.
Can police stop her assailant before it's too late?
There's another victim.
He said, if I had some alcohol, you'll be dead.
He's like, I don't want to kill y'all, like you better kill me.
I mean, this guy is completely sick.
We had to catch him quickly, or it was going to keep going.
With police hot on his trail, he'll do everything he can to outsmart them.
He obviously had perfected what he was doing.
This all seemed to be some sort of game to him.
That's him. Go, 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 go.
He said, how good is DNA? Is that good evidence?
He had a fetish for violent sex.
He's the prime example of a sociopath.
2016. The small town of Lithonia, Georgia is buzzing with excitement, getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday.
Lithonia is a city here on the outskirts of Atlanta.
Lithonia is located in the unincorporated part of DeKalb County. It is middle income, mostly hardworking people.
It's definitely a family town. It gives a little bit of big city with down-home vibe at the same time. Lots of great eateries, great schools.
At 11:30 a.m., a local hotel is preparing for the influx of customers they get every year around the holiday season.
Employees at the hotel was going about their routine of the day, cleaning rooms, getting them ready for incoming customers.
A housekeeper was assigned to clean up room 207. She knocked on the door.
Housekeeping.
There was no answer. She again called out, housekeeping.
Housekeeping.
No one answered.
At that time, they didn't necessarily find it suspicious.
There wasn't a do not disturb sign on the door or anything like that, so she assumed the person staying there was out for the day.
The housekeeper uses her master key to enter the room for its routine cleaning. But she's surprised to see it isn't empty after all.
When she entered the room, she saw a young black female on her knees, face down on the bed.
As she gets closer, she notices that her hands and her feet are bound.
She appeared to be zip-tied in the back, and she realized that she was deceased.
She was shocked and ran out of the room, screaming for her manager.
Help! Help!
DeKalb County Police are immediately dispatched to the scene.
I walked into the room with another detective. I didn't see any blood around her body, but it looked like she had been suffocated. There was a black bandana in her mouth.
Possible asphyxiation for cause of death.
And as investigators continue their review of the crime scene, they find another piece of evidence that makes their hearts sink.
Detective, take a look at this.
On the table that housed the TV, there was a picture taken, a sonogram of an expected mother.
It said she was 9 weeks pregnant. And in the corner of the ultrasound, there was the name Ashley Mays.
Born and raised in Lithonia, 20-year-old Ashley Mays had a personality that was nothing short of magnetic.
Ashley was an amazing young woman, charismatic, friendly, just pure joy to be around.
Ashley was a ball of light, full of energy, just sharing her love with everybody. She loved dancing.
Any opportunity she had, she was somewhere dancing, enjoying the music, taking pictures, living life. She was the life of the party.
Ashley's good looks and larger-than-life personality meant she didn't have trouble attracting potential boyfriends.
Ashley met Stephen McBride in her senior year of high school.
They fall hard. They had some pretty heavy feelings very, very quickly, especially for her to be so young.
They were really cute together.
It wasn't soon after they got together that Ashley found herself pregnant.
Wow, you pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
You think we ready for this?
You know, there's lots of concerns about, is he ready? Am I ready? Although they knew they wanted a family together, they didn't anticipate it being so soon.
I really think we can make it work, Stephen.
Well, if you're happy, then I'm happy.
Fortunately enough, Stephen was supportive. He was as present as he could be.
Even though they were young, they were in love, and they were happy to take this next step in their life.
They both graduated from high school, and in 2013, their baby boy was born.
But shortly before the birth of their son, tragedy struck.
Stephen, he was murdered due to senseless gun violence. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time, which happens a lot in Atlanta, unfortunately.
This completely shattered Ashley's world. He was her first love. He was the father of their child. She just had a baby. I mean, this just rocked her world as she knew it.
She has now just dealt with the death of her significant other, the father of her child, and dealing with the financial uncertainty that comes with raising a baby. It's expensive.
And eventually, the pressure became too much.
Ashley ended up checking herself into a homeless shelter.
Her son lived with relatives while Ashley worked to get back on her feet.
Her family tried to help her out to the best of their abilities. However, Ashley wanted to do it on her own. She wanted her son to be able to be proud of her.
The people that were staying there, they all just loved her so much.
Miss Ida, do you have a blanket?
No, I'll be all right.
No, I have an extra one you can borrow.
Oh, thank you, honey.
Yeah, of
thank
course,
you
of
so
course.
much.
This wasn't an ideal situation, and yet Ashley made the most of this situation. She became a light to the other residents and even the staff at this local shelter.
She really felt like it was important for her to make a way for herself and really lean on herself and become the woman that she wanted to be.
So how did Ashley end up dead in a local hotel room?
Her positioning and what was done to her was a red flag to me that this was serious. I mean, they're all serious, don't get me wrong about that, but this screamed predator to me.
This wasn't the first time he'd done something like this.
I knew it was going to happen again, and we needed to stop it.
In the fall of 2016, 20-year-old Ashley Mays was still trying to move forward from a tragic loss.
The death of her boyfriend, Stephen, took a huge toll on her. He was her first love and the father of her son.
In today's society, it's extremely difficult to manage a household with two parents. Ashley was a single parent. There are lots of challenges as it related to income, job, housing, transportation, daycare.
After sending her son to stay with relatives, Ashley had moved into a local homeless shelter until she could get back on her feet.
While living in the homeless shelter, Ashley was still bringing joy to the other people.
But now, Ashley's lifeless body has been discovered tied up in a Lithonia hotel room.
It appeared as though she had been suffocated because there was a black bandana still in her throat.
According to an ultrasound photo investigators found inside her hotel room, Ashley was 9 weeks pregnant at the time of her death.
For her to totally be disregarded and to be used and abused in such a way, it was disheartening.
For DeKalb County Police, finding Ashley's killer is a top priority.
While CSI was processing the scene, I went down to the manager's office.
Excuse me, I was hoping you could show us your security cam footage.
Yeah, of course. Just go ahead and come around and I'll show you. Here it is right here.
The footage shows Ashley arriving at the hotel around 7 a.m. that morning.
They saw Ashley go into the room after checking in, and then a male approached the room.
He was a black male, kind of chunky. He had a pair of dark jeans. He had a green jacket with an American flag on the back. He had a beard, and he had gold-rimmed glasses on.
They saw the male enter the room and leave approximately 40 minutes later.
Nothing about his demeanor said that suspicious activity was happening. He was very calm.
The camera shows him leaving through the front parking lot.
Then he gets into his car.
The only thing that I could tell from the video is that it was a dark color Impala, older model.
Can you zoom in on the license plate anymore?
That's as far as they can go right there.
We could see where the license plate was, but the pixelation would not give us a number on the license plate.
Investigators' new priority is tracking down the driver of the dark-colored Impala.
Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
To further their investigation, the detectives now took the description they had of both the person and the car, and they placed it on the media to look out for a dark-colored Impala.
As detectives wait for leads to come in, they review the results of Ashley's autopsy report.
The medical examiner was able to determine that she was strangled, and that was the cause of her death.
They also confirmed that she was indeed 9 weeks pregnant, just as the ultrasound photo described.
But that's not the only tragic news the medical examiner discovered.
The autopsy report also revealed that sadly Ashley had been raped by her killer.
The medical examiner was able to collect the killer's DNA from Ashley's body for testing. Once detectives locate their suspect, they'll be able to see if he's a match.
At this point, investigators had to look at whether the father of Ashley's unborn child could have been the same person who did this to her.
It sounds awful, but it's not uncommon for fathers to kill the mothers of the unborn baby to avoid having to pay child support.
Searching for the identity of the father of Ashley's unborn child, detectives touch base with Ashley's own father to see if he has any information.
I asked him to come to the office because I needed to sit down and talk to him.
I know this is difficult.
Still can't believe that she's gone.
Do you have any information about the pregnancy that might help us determine who did this to her?
Any information on the father?
No, I don't.
No one knew who the father was.
Not even Ashley.
As a homeless woman, Ashley was in a very vulnerable position. Unfortunately, homeless women are often targeted and sexually exploited.
Detectives must consider that Ashley's pregnancy wasn't something she chose.
Statistically, homeless women are 20% more likely to experience sexual assault.
And according to Ashley's father, she had begun working unconventional jobs to obtain the money she needed to get off the streets.
She just was so stubborn. She didn't want anybody to help her.
She had begun running escort services out of various websites. She didn't have any other forms of income. It's kind of a sad situation.
Those allegations raised immediate alarm. Sadly, sex work and sexual violence often go hand in hand.
I wasn't happy about it, but what can I do? She was so headstrong and determined.
Before detectives end their interview with Ashley's father, they have one more question for him.
Do you happen to recognize the man in this photo?
No, sir.
He had no idea who the man in the surveillance video could be.
Thanks for coming in. We'll be in touch.
Considering Ashley's involvement in sex work, detectives begin searching for more information on their victim and her recent contacts.
They discover that Ashley's telephone number is actually associated with an account on Backpage.com.
Backpage used to be very commonly used to trade sexual favors for money.
Could that be why Ashley was at the hotel that fateful night?
We knew that she was probably in that room prostituting.
Ashley was young and probably didn't realize the danger she was putting herself in by advertising on Backpage.
It's one of the worst examples of how the internet is used and how people are preyed upon.
There are real fears that this individual already has or will strike again.
And what investigators are about to discover will confirm those fears.
There's another victim.
She lived to tell the tale, barely.
He said, if I had some alcohol, you'll be dead.
In the fall of 2016, Georgia detectives investigating the murder of 20-year-old Ashley Mays suspect her killer found her on Backpage.com after she posted an ad offering escort services.
At the time of her death, Ashley was a young, pregnant mother with no reliable sources of income. Unfortunately, women who turn to this line of work often fall victim to violence.
But is Ashley the only victim?
Whoever killed Ashley seemed experienced and came to that hotel with a premeditated plan.
Detectives realized that this may not be a first time for this suspect.
Detective Schuler. Oh, really?
Once we got back to the office, we started talking about the case. At that point, it was brought up that our special victims unit had worked a rape case the week prior.
And this incident had very eerie similarities to Ashley's case.
Black bandana, zip ties. Suspect was wearing a green jacket with an American flag on it. So at that point, we realized that these two cases were going to be related.
But unlike Ashley, this woman lived to tell the tale, barely. And the detectives want to talk to her as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Let's bring her in.
The victim, Raven Kyle, agrees to meet with the detectives working Ashley's case.
Raven is a young, single mom. She has a post on Backpage where she exchanges her time for roses, which is code for money. She says on the morning of Friday, November 11th, she receives a message from a man offering to give her 100 roses for her time.
Did he ever give you a nickname or say his name?
He never said his name. He just...
When you talked to him on the phone, how did he introduce himself?
He never introduced himself.
Is that common?
Yeah.
Okay.
He asked for my address, and I texted him the address, and he came about 20 minutes later.
Raven says her client arrived just before 8 p.m.
He arrives in a dark Chevy Impala.
He walked into her townhouse, and at that point, she was assaulted.
And I turned around, he had a gun. And I'm like, what do you want? I'll give you whatever you want.
He tied her with zip ties, the same as Ashley Mays.
He tied my arms behind my back, and then he tied up my legs. He took the bandana out of his pocket, and he shoved it in my mouth, and he shoved it down my throat. And after that, he raped me.
But Raven's horrifying experience didn't end there.
He got the bleach out of my closet, and he just started pouring it all over me.
He then asked her, "Do you have any alcohol?"
When you mix bleach and alcohol together, it creates chloroform. If inhaled, chloroform can be very deadly.
And I was like, no. He said, if I had some alcohol, you'll be dead.
Then he left her tied up.
She was able to free herself, ran out of her townhouse crying, screaming. Neighbors heard, came over and assisted and called 911.
She knows she's very lucky to be alive.
Raven describes her attacker as a large black male.
How heavy set or how skinny was he?
He was not skinny.
Not skinny.
The investigators show her the stills of the hotel surveillance.
Is this the guy that attacked you?
Yeah, that's him. That's him with gold glasses, the boot, the black pants. That's him.
She unequivocally so was able to confirm it is the same person.
Before detectives conclude the interview, Raven provides another key piece of evidence.
Raven's attacker took 2 of her phones, but as it turns out, she had a 3rd device that wasn't taken. And that device just happened to be the one that she was corresponding with him on.
And I do have the phone number.
She called that her work phone. So we were able to get the number that he contacted her from.
Detectives find the same number in the records they've obtained for Ashley's cell phone.
She had correspondence with his number just 1 hour before she was killed.
The women were strangers. There were no 2 calls from the same number, except for one.
So I knew that we were dealing with a good lead on who may have contacted these victims and then assaulted them.
We started sending subpoenas to try to get the identity of the owner of that phone number.
It's no easy task.
The phone provider was what we call a VoIP, or a voice over internet protocol device.
Unlike traditional mobile phones that use cell towers, VoIP devices make and receive calls using the internet. VoIP startup companies can and often go out of business, so users' numbers are frequently sold to other companies.
Those accounts usually get handed off several times. So you've got to follow the breadcrumb trail to get to the very last one.
Every new account requires another subpoena, and that takes time.
Time isn't what authorities have on their side right now.
We knew we had to catch him quickly, or it was going to keep going. It was going to keep escalating.
But on November 29th, investigators get a promising lead from an unlikely source, a low-level pimp named Corey Collins.
This person comes forward with yet another violent story.
Usually people that live that lifestyle don't want to have a ton of involvement with the police.
He's like, I don't want to kill you, like you better kill me.
He understood the significance of what had happened and what may happen again if we don't stop it.
In the fall of 2016, a string of violent attacks, including one that claimed the life of 20-year-old Ashley Mays, has authorities in Lithonia, Georgia, racing for answers.
There is evidence that would definitely indicate he is a predator and he would do this again.
Now investigators are speaking with a man who claims to have information on another violent assault.
Corey Collins was a low-level pimp in the area. He was afraid for his girl's safety after all the violence that had been plaguing the city's sex workers lately.
Usually people that live that lifestyle don't want to have a ton of involvement with the police. They want to handle their own business and move on to their next job. But he gave us information that really assisted us in solving this case. So he did a good thing.
Corey tells detectives that on November 13th, a man reached out on Backpage to enlist the services of one of his girls.
You ever talked to him before?
No.
Corey arranged for the date at a local hotel. He got 2 rooms side by side, just in case there was any funny business going on.
Minutes later, Corey, from his room, hears screams.
It was real loud, so I ran to swat the key and came in.
Yo, what the hell is going on here? I didn't do nothing.
He saw the victim with a black bandana in her mouth and she was bleeding. She was in an obvious struggle with this guy. This guy was in possession of a firearm.
We both had our guns on each other.
What did he say to you when you came in?
He was just looked scared. Then he was like, I didn't do nothing. She got the money.
And they kind of had about a 30-second standoff where they just stared at each other.
Then he started backing up out the room and he was like, I don't want to kill y'all, like you better kill me.
But Corey knew he didn't need a murder on his hands.
He just kept backing up. And he like, don't shoot me. All I mean, you better get some.
The male is able to get outside the hotel room. You better run!
The assailant fled the scene in a dark-colored sedan, just like the one police had on surveillance from Ashley Mace's murder.
Detectives know tracking down the suspect's dark-colored Impala is crucial to their investigation. But they soon receive an even more promising Crime Stoppers tip.
We got a call from a young lady who claimed to know the male that was responsible for these crimes.
She was another sex worker.
When I saw the Crime Stoppers alert, I just knew I needed to call in.
The woman tells detectives she knows someone who fits the description of the man police have been searching for.
His name is Trey Williams, and he has frequent interactions with the sex workers in town. He also drives a dark-colored Impala.
We talked to her, and she agreed to set up a date later that evening to kind of lure him into the apartment complex.
As night falls on Lithonia, police set up a stakeout.
Myself and Detective McQuilkin were at the location with uniformed officers.
When authorities see the Impala pull in, they take action.
That's him. Go, 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 go.
We initiated a traffic stop on him and took him into custody.
What's going on? You're under arrest.
I didn't do nothing.
Once Trey Williams is detained, detectives search his vehicle.
We processed the car first because we were looking for important evidence that we knew was stored in that car.
They found a bag full of condoms.
We did not find any zip ties or any black bandanas, but we did find personal information on various prostitutes in the area. He had actually graded them by service and how much they charged, and he had given them a ranking system.
Clearly, this man was interested in having lots of sex.
It was disturbing. He had an obsession with these women.
In the winter of 2016, police have Trey Williams in custody for the murder of Ashley Mays and the violent assaults of at least 2 other women.
He was an individual who would drive around looking for sex.
Inside Trey's vehicle, detectives find a notebook ranking the services of various escorts, as well as their personal information.
Surprisingly, Ashley and Raven weren't in the notebook, but dozens of other escorts were.
Once we processed his car, we went back to interview him at headquarters.
Someone is out there hurting these women.
That's what I hear.
Well, it's no coincidence you are sitting here.
It's not me.
Trey says that he is not a violent person and he simply likes to have a good time.
When they ask him about Ashley Mays, he denies knowing her or the other girls.
I'll admit I'm no saint, but I would never hurt a woman. You got the wrong guy.
But detectives are skeptical.
They asked him if he would agree to submit DNA samples, and he agreed.
Sure, take whatever you want.
The officers swabbed him for DNA.
They knew the DNA test would soon tell them the full story.
But when detectives receive the results of the DNA swab, they're stunned.
When they get the DNA results back, Trey is not a match.
Trey was not their man.
We thought we had the right guy. You get run around a lot, but that was a good false lead.
Detectives are now back at square one.
That means the success of this case now hinges on their remaining piece of key evidence: the suspect's phone records.
If authorities were going to solve this case, they had to find a way to identify the person that made the calls to these women on an internet phone.
After 3 days spent contacting various phone companies, investigators finally get a hit.
Oh, you got it? Great.
It was Pinger. Pinger Inc. held the records. So I subpoenaed quick pinger for the records for that phone number.
There's no name associated with the account. However, there is a username. Tariq Hall, 1992.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
I immediately assumed 1992 was a birth year, and I was able to quickly find a Tariq Hall with that birth year. I was also able to find a photograph of Mr. Hall. And when I looked at that photograph and compared it to what I had seen in the video from the hotel, I knew that we had the right person.
Detectives learn that Tariq works at a rapid transit company in Metro Atlanta.
Tariq Hall was a bus driver for their mobility services.
On November 29, 2016, Tariq arrives at work in the same black Chevy Impala police have been searching for.
Once he arrived at work, we were able to take him into custody without incident.
Inside Tariq's vehicle, police locate a plethora of evidence.
We found several black bandanas that matched the previous crime scenes and zip ties that were already put together in a position to where they could be used as handcuffs very quickly.
Back at the station, detectives sit down with their new prime suspect.
I read him his Miranda rights, and he agreed to waive his rights and provide me with a statement.
Tariq also agreed to a DNA swab.
This one right there. Now, understand the rights that we just talked about. Do you want to talk to me about why you're up here?
Yeah. So we had a lengthy conversation. I asked him about his involvement with young ladies that worked on Backpage.
How often do you call girls on Backpage?
Not that often.
When they try to talk to him about the attack on Raven, he says he doesn't know anything about that.
He also denied knowing anything about the standoff at the hotel with Corey.
It's a long time ago. I can't remember back that far.
He would not answer any questions in reference to either case that we were talking about. He just had no memory.
When detectives mention Ashley's murder, Tariq, again, can't recall a thing.
To help jog Tariq's memory, detectives confront him with the hotel surveillance footage.
Look at me in the eye and tell me that's not you. You can't do it, man.
Tariq took no responsibility, even though the officer showed him his own picture.
Tariq was very cool, eerily cool, in the interrogation room.
The way you walked into that hotel room and the way you walked out, cool as a cucumber, man. It's like you've done this 100 times.
Tariq's demeanor showed a person who did not care about the life of anybody.
And detectives are getting frustrated with his nonchalant attitude.
I wasn't in the
You were in the damn room, Tariq. Don't look at me like I'm stupid and tell me that you weren't in that room. All right? Don't disrespect me like that.
He seemed absolutely unbothered by any of the evidence that they were bringing against him.
You know where you up? Your cell phone. The email address you used to re-up? Tariq Hall, 1992.
Then he just said, I don't want to answer any more questions. I need an attorney. So the interview's over.
So, a lawyer.
Okay, you need a lawyer? You need one. Trust me, you need one.
But when detectives subpoena the contents of Tariq's cell phone, they'll uncover even more chilling evidence against him.
I found images of our victim.
Tariq's a prime example of a sociopath.
This all seemed to be some sort of game to him.
Police have arrested 24-year-old bus driver Tariq Hall for the murder of Ashley Mays and assaults against 2 other women in the Atlanta area.
This is someone who is a predator. And from what I could tell, had been at it for a while and was not going to stop.
Tariq's cool as a cucumber demeanor, the way he did the whole interview with detectives, just shows that he is a cold-blooded killer who just has no remorse.
That's further confirmed when detectives scroll through the camera roll on Tariq's phone.
He had actually recorded a video of him watching our Crime Stoppers tip air on the news.
When the video closes, the only thing he says is, "I can beat that."
Deeper in Tariq's camera roll is something even more chilling.
I found images of our victim, Maze, before and after she was killed.
This all seemed to be some sort of game to him, where maybe he even saw these women as being trophies.
There is no indication that he would have stopped, and I don't believe he would have.
However, the most damning evidence against Tariq is revealed when they compare his DNA with the foreign DNA collected from Ashley's body.
The nail in the coffin is results from the DNA test. It's an exact match.
There was a 1 in 10 sextillion chance that it was anybody else in the world. That's a big number.
Detective Schuler decides to personally inform Tariq of the news.
Well, how about this?
I just presented the DNA evidence, and Mr. Hall stated at that point, he said, "How good is DNA?" He said, "Is that good evidence?"
It's some of the best evidence there is.
At that point, I told him that he would never get out of jail because DNA is unbreakable evidence.
The DNA evidence is big enough to knock the fight right out of Tariq.
Okay. Okay.
He called his sister from the jail and said, "Don't worry about selling my car for an attorney. I'm not gonna need one. They got me."
Tariq admits he found Ashley on Backpage, and they agree to meet at the hotel for a rendezvous.
Hey, you Ashley?
Yeah, you got cash?
Yeah.
Come on in.
Immediately, Tariq brandished a gun, pulled it out.
Get on the bed.
Well, I didn't do all that.
Get on the bed!
He made her lay down.
Please stop!
Shut up!
Next, he pulled zip ties out of his pocket and zip tied her hands and her feet behind her back.
He shoved a bandana in her mouth, just like he did with Raven, and snapped a few photos.
Then he had his way with her.
In the process, Tariq admits he strangled Ashley.
Once she was dead, he took more photos. I mean, this guy is completely sick.
Then he calmly walked out of the hotel.
Tariq, why? Why did you do it?
I don't know. I just lose control sometimes.
He essentially just had a fetish for violent sex and didn't care when it went too far.
People ask me why Ashley, why kill that one? And the way that I was told that Ashley was found, face down with her head buried in a pillow, tells me that Tariq was not going to let Ashley call out or draw attention. Like in the case of Raven, and I think that's why Ashley was the first one he killed that we know of. To be able to get this person off the street before he did it again was incredibly satisfying.
On October 4th, 2017, Tariq Hall pleads guilty to murder and rape charges.
He did not want to go to trial, so he pled to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
1 life sentence for the murder of Ashley. Another life sentence for the rape of Raven.
Mr. Hall will end up dying in jail. He'll never get out.
At least this man is not on the streets anymore. He can't harm women.
The biting wind of late December in Alberta does not merely chill the skin, it aggressively hollows out the spirit, claiming the silent, snow-covered avenues of Edmonton with a suffocating, sub-zero grip. On the frozen night of December 29, 2014, the city was draped in a deceptive, pristine white blanket, the kind that usually brings a sense of serene holiday peace as families gather indoors to escape the hostile northern climate. The festive string lights draped along the gutters of suburban homes in the quiet neighborhood of Clavatten flickered against the dark, heavy sky, casting soft hues of red, green, and gold onto the snowdrifts piled high against the windows. To any casual observer driving through these neatly arranged streets, the scene epitomized the quintessential Canadian winter wonderland, a safe haven where the greatest worry might be an icy driveway or a stalling car engine in the morning frost. Yet, beneath this tranquil veneer of holiday cheer and neighborhood security, an unimaginable, calculated darkness was systematically unfurling inside a seemingly unremarkable two-story house, a darkness so profound that it would forever shatter the collective consciousness of an entire nation. The air inside that home did not carry the comforting aroma of a late-season family feast, but rather the heavy, unmistakable stagnation of fear, followed by the terrifying, sharp scent of burning gunpowder that would linger long after the warmth of human life had been extinguished. A man stands in the suffocating shadows of the hallway, his breathing heavy but deliberate, a stark and monstrous contrast to the rhythmic, peaceful respiration of the innocent souls sleeping just a few feet away. In his hand, the cold, unyielding weight of a black 9mm handgun feels unnaturally heavy, yet entirely familiar, an instrument of absolute finality that had been reported stolen nearly a decade prior and kept hidden away for an occasion exactly like this. His fingers, calloused from years of manual labor and stiff from the creeping chill of the house, wrap tightly around the grip, the knuckle of his index finger resting lightly against the smooth curve of the trigger. There is no hesitation in his eyes, only a hollow, glazed expression of total consumption, a mind completely swallowed by the toxic alchemy of mounting gambling debts, a humiliating impending bankruptcy, and a festering, lifelong resentment that had finally boiled over into a murderous rage. He looks down at the weapon, then toward the closed bedroom doors, listening intently to the soft, rhythmic sounds of the sleeping household, a family that had once looked to him for protection but would now find only their ultimate destruction at his hands. Every footstep he takes across the floorboards is intentionally muted, a predatory glide through the domestic sanctuary he had decided to transform into a slaughterhouse, driven by a twisted philosophy that if he could not possess peace, happiness, and respect, then no one around him would be allowed to survive to enjoy them either. Hours later, far across the city in the affluent, quiet enclave of Haddow, the relative peace of another family home is violently ruptured by the sudden, deafening intrusion of that very same weapon. A mother stands in her own kitchen, perhaps tidying up after her children or preparing for the coming days, when the door is breached by a figure who embodies the manifestation of a living nightmare. There is no prolonged argument, no chance for negotiation or desperate pleading, only the terrifying visual of a man possessed by an unholy mission, his eyes fixed on her with a detached, chilling focus that defies human empathy. The flash of the muzzle lights up the room for a fraction of a second, an artificial bolt of lightning that permanently sears itself into the memories of the young children watching from the shadows. Their screams echoing fruitlessly against the cold kitchen tile as their mother collapses onto the floor. The killer does not linger to witness the immediate aftermath of his cruelty, nor does he show a single shred of remorse as he turns on his heel, leaving behind a scene of absolute devastation to step back out into the freezing night air. The snow crunching softly beneath his boots as he walks toward his dark sport utility vehicle. He drives away into the Edmonton night, a ghost navigating the icy grid of the city, leaving behind a trail of blood that spans from the northern suburbs to the southwestern developments, a synchronized campaign of domestic terror executed with a cold, terrifying precision. By the time the clock ticks past midnight and edges into the early morning hours of December 30th, the full, grotesque scale of the horror begins to reveal itself to the unsuspecting first responders who are called to the scene. When the heavy wooden door of the Clavatten home is finally breached by Edmonton police officers at 12:23 in the morning, the silence that greets them is not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping household, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The air inside is thick, warm, and metallic, carrying an odor that every seasoned homicide detective recognizes instantly and dreads above all else. Flashlight beams cut through the pitch-black rooms, dancing frantically across the walls until they settle on the first of many unspeakable sights, illuminating the pale, lifeless forms of victims caught entirely off guard, many still tucked beneath their heavy winter blankets. The beam moves from room to room, revealing a grim catalogue of mortality that defies comprehension. 3 women, 2 men, and most agonizingly of all, 2 young children, their bright futures extinguished in a matter of seconds by a relative who was supposed to love and protect them. The radio chatter among the officers transitions from standard, measured dispatches to frantic, emotionally strained whispers as the sheer body count rises with every room they clear. Realizing with growing horror that they are standing in the epicenter of the worst mass murder in the history of Edmonton. As dawn breaks over the frozen landscape of Alberta, the hunt for the monster responsible for this unprecedented carnage leads the authorities away from the residential neighborhoods and toward a small, commercial strip 30 kilometers to the northeast, in the quiet town of Fort Saskatchewan. There, parked outside a modest Vietnamese restaurant called VN Express, sits the black sport utility vehicle, its windows frosted over and its engine cold, a silent marker pointing toward the final chapter of this horrific saga. Inside the darkened restaurant, a space normally filled with the vibrant sounds of clinking dishes, boiling broth, and friendly chatter, the killer sits alone in the absolute darkness, surrounded by the ghosts of his actions and the reality of his total ruin. He knows the perimeter is rapidly closing in, that the flashing red and blue lights of tactical vehicles are already beginning to reflect off the restaurant's front windows, signaling the end of his flight. With the same cold detachment he utilized against his own flesh and blood, he raises the 9mm pistol to his own head, pulling the trigger one last time to escape the earthly justice that awaited him, leaving behind a legacy of absolute destruction. An entire family tree violently uprooted, and a community left paralyzed by grief and a million unanswered questions. The Edmonton family massacre of late December 2014 stands as a stark, harrowing reminder of how quickly the sanctuary of a home can be violated when toxic masculinity, unchecked domestic violence, and financial desperation coalesce into a perfect storm of malice. It is an account that forces us to look directly into the abyss of human nature, to examine the subtle, warning signs that were ignored or minimized by a system ill-equipped to handle the depths of such personal depravity. This is not merely a story about a man who lost his mind or a criminal who went on a rampage, it is a deep, painful exploration of a family's vulnerability, the tragic loss of 8 innocent lives who had come to Canada seeking safety and prosperity, only to find their ultimate demise in the very place they called home. As we peel back the layers of this devastating case, we must navigate the complex psychological landscape of the perpetrator, Phu Lam, understanding how a man could transition from an ordinary immigrant, a tradesman, and a father, into one of the most prolific and cold-blooded killers the country has ever witnessed. We must honor the memories of those who were stolen from us on that freezing December night, ensuring that their names and their stories are not forgotten beneath the overwhelming shadow of the horror that claimed them. In the days following the discovery, the collective grief of the city transformed into an overwhelming, heavy pall that seemed to hang over the entire province, casting a dark cloud over what should have been a time of renewal and celebration for the upcoming new year. The details that emerged from the investigation only served to deepen the public's anguish, revealing a complex web of terror that had been spinning in secret for years before it finally snapped with such catastrophic force. Friends, neighbors, and members of the tight-knit Vietnamese-Canadian community gathered in frozen vigils, their tears freezing on their cheeks as they held small, flickering candles against the bitter Alberta wind, trying desperately to make sense of a tragedy that defied all logic. How could a father look into the eyes of his 8-year-old son and decide that the child's life should end? How could an extended family, who had survived the immense hardships of migration and resettlement, be systematically wiped out within the span of a single morning? These questions echoed through the quiet halls of the Truc Lam Monastery during the subsequent memorial services, where the smoke of burning incense rose toward the ceiling, carrying with it the collective sorrows of a community left to pick up the shattered pieces of a family that no longer existed. To truly understand the magnitude of what occurred in Edmonton during those final days of 2014, one must look beyond the sterile statistics of the police reports and the sensationalized headlines of the evening news. One must immerse oneself in the claustrophobic atmosphere of those 2 homes, feeling the tension that had been building like a pressure cooker behind closed doors, driven by a man whose inner demons had completely eclipsed his humanity. This script will guide you through the darkest corridors of this true crime tragedy, tracing the timeline from the first signs of trouble years prior, through the meticulously planned executions, to the frantic police response, and finally to the somber aftermath that changed the city forever. It is a narrative of profound sadness, but also one that demands to be told with absolute precision, respect, and a commitment to uncovering the systemic failures that allowed such a monster to walk free until it was tragically too late. Through the eyes of the investigators who walked into those blood-soaked rooms, the family members who received the devastating news in the middle of the night, and the community that refused to let the victims be forgotten, we will piece together the anatomy of a massacre that remains a permanent scar on the heart of Western Canada. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of the horror that unfolded in the final days of 2014, one must first understand the unique geographical and cultural tapestry of Edmonton, Alberta. A city defined by its extreme seasonal contrasts and its historical role as a sanctuary for those seeking a fresh start. Nestled deep within the vast, windswept prairies of Western Canada, Edmonton is a metropolis built on resilience, where winters are not merely a change in the weather but a brutal, months-long test of human endurance. With temperatures frequently plummeting to levels where the air itself feels like a physical weight crushing the lungs. This harsh environmental backdrop serves as a silent, powerful character in the narrative, a frozen crucible that forces people indoors, locking families behind heavy wooden doors and double-paned glass windows to seek warmth and security in the company of one another. For decades, this city had built a reputation as a prosperous, safe haven, a blue-collar town fueled by the oil patch and sustained by close-knit, hard-working suburban communities where children played hockey on frozen backyard rinks and neighbors looked out for one another across pristine, snow-draped lawns. It was a place where mass violence was something people read about in foreign newspapers, an abstract concept that belonged to distant, troubled lands, far removed from the orderly, peaceful grids of Edmonton's expanding suburban developments. Within this sprawling northern landscape, the suburban neighborhoods of Clavatin in the far north and Haddow in the affluent southwest represented the pinnacle of the Canadian dream for thousands of immigrant families who had left behind war, poverty, and political instability to build a legacy of safety and prosperity for their descendants. The Clavatin neighborhood, where the primary and most devastating scene of the massacre would occur, was a relatively new development characterized by its modern, multi-story family homes, manicured parks, and quiet, winding crescents designed specifically to keep through traffic at a minimum. It was the kind of neighborhood where the arrival of a stranger's vehicle was noticed, where the rhythm of daily life was predictable, dictated by the morning commute, the school bus schedule, and the weekend trips to local recreation centers. The houses here stood close together, their architectural designs uniform and welcoming, symbolizing a collective middle-class stability that many had spent a lifetime of grueling physical labor to achieve. In stark contrast to the chaotic, densely populated urban centers of Southeast Asia from which many of its residents had originally emerged, Clavatin offered an almost surreal level of quietude. An environment where the rustle of dry leaves in the autumn wind or the crunch of fresh powder beneath a winter boot were often the loudest sounds audible on a weekday afternoon. It was supposed to be a fortress against the unpredictable dangers of the world, a sanctuary where families could lower their guard and sleep soundly through the long, dark winter nights, confident that the structural integrity of their community would protect them from the elements and from the malice of outsiders. Yet, it was precisely within this enclave of domestic tranquility that a slow-burning fuse had been lit years prior, hidden away in the private, claustrophobic domestic sphere where the illusion of neighborhood safety meets the terrifying reality of hidden domestic tyranny. To trace the origins of this fuse, one must look back to the late 1970s, an era when Canada opened its doors to tens of thousands of refugees fleeing the catastrophic aftermath of the Vietnam War. A humanitarian migration that would fundamentally and beautifully reshape the cultural fabric of cities like Edmonton. Among those who arrived on Canadian soil during this turbulent period was a young Phu Lam, who migrated in 1979, carrying with him the invisible, heavy psychological baggage of a homeland torn apart by conflict. Coupled with the immense pressure of adapting to a completely alien culture, language, and climate. For many Vietnamese immigrants of his generation, resettlement was achieved through sheer, unyielding grit. They formed tight-knit communities, established businesses, supported local temples and churches, and prioritized the education of their children above all else. Gradually earning a reputation as one of the most industrious and resilient demographics in the country. They built lives based on mutual trust, cultural preservation, and a fierce determination to leave the trauma of the past behind, creating vibrant enclaves within Edmonton where traditional values of familial honor, respect, and patriarchal authority remained deeply ingrained. However, while the vast majority of this diaspora channeled their hardships into constructive growth, the transition for Phu Lam was marked by a dark, steady descent into the underbelly of his new society. A trajectory that revealed a man increasingly unable or unwilling to conform to the laws and moral boundaries of the country that had granted him asylum. As the years advanced into the late 1980s and 90s, Phu Lam's name began to appear with alarming frequency on the radar of local law enforcement, painting a picture of an individual who operated on the fringes of legitimacy, drawn to the quick, volatile rewards of the criminal underworld. His criminal record, which commenced as early as 1987, was not a series of minor, desperate infractions, but a substantial ledger that included serious charges related to drug trafficking and acts of overt physical violence, indicating a volatile temperament and a profound lack of respect for authority. Despite these run-ins with the justice system, Lam managed to maintain a dual identity within the local community, presenting himself on one hand as a skilled, capable tradesman who possessed an equity stake in a local commercial enterprise, and on the other, as a deeply troubled gambler whose life was increasingly dictated by the chaotic whims of chance and high-stakes debt. He was a man who straddled two worlds, utilizing his role as a maintenance worker and restaurant partner to project an image of immigrant success and domestic stability, while secretly frequenting underground gambling dens where he accumulated staggering financial liabilities that chipped away at his sanity and his self-esteem. This dual existence created a volatile psychological pressure cooker, as the public respect he desperately craved from his peers and his extended family was constantly threatened by the looming, catastrophic reality of his secret financial ruin. By the time the timeline progressed into the early 2000s, Phu Lam's personal life had become deeply intertwined with that of Thuy Tien Trung, a woman significantly younger than him, whose family had also established deep roots within the Edmonton Vietnamese community. The age gap between them, combined with Lam's authoritarian tendencies and traditional, rigid expectations of marital submissiveness, created an immediate and toxic imbalance of power within the household, a dynamic that was exacerbated exponentially by Lam's escalating financial desperation. To the outside world, and particularly within the tight-knit cultural circles of their community, the pressures within the marriage were largely kept hidden behind a wall of silence. Dictated by a powerful cultural stigma surrounding domestic discord and the deeply held belief that family matters should be resolved privately, away from the prying eyes of the public or the intervention of Western legal institutions. This silence allowed Lam's abusive behavior to fester and grow in the dark, transforming the family home from a space of mutual support into a highly monitored, terrified fiefdom where his wife and her relatives walked on eggshells, constantly gauging his unpredictable moods and trying to placate a man whose temper could be triggered by the slightest perceived slight or financial setback. The birth of their son, Elvis, and later a daughter, did little to soften Lam's hardening exterior. Instead, the added financial and emotional responsibilities of fatherhood seemed to only heighten his resentment, viewing his family not as a source of joy, but as a financial burden and an audience to his mounting failures. The true, terrifying nature of this domestic arrangement was briefly forced into the light of day in 2012, 2 years before the final tragedy, when a violent altercation inside the home escalated to the point where external authorities could no longer be ignored. In a fit of uncontrolled, possessive rage, Phu Lam had physically assaulted Thuy Tien and explicitly threatened to murder her, her parents, and any member of her family who attempted to intervene or assist her in leaving him. A chillingly accurate preview of the exact crime he would commit 2 years later. The police were called, arrests were made, and serious criminal charges were laid against Lam, a development that should have served as a definitive, life-saving intervention for a family in imminent peril. However, within the complexities of the legal system and the cultural pressures brought to bear upon the victims, the case began to unravel, facing intense stress, fear of retaliation, and potential pressure to maintain family unity at all costs. the crucial testimonies were compromised, leading to the charges being systematically dropped or reduced to minor infractions. Lamb walked away from the courthouse not as a rehabilitated man who had seen the error of his ways, but as an emboldened abuser who had learned that the system could be maneuvered and that his threats carried no real, lasting consequences from the state, effectively returning him to the domestic sphere with his sense of absolute authority reinforced. As 2014 drew to a close, the external pressures closing in on Fu Lam reached a critical, unsustainable mass, transforming his lingering resentment into an active, lethal malice that required only a spark to ignite. His gambling addictions had finally caught up with him in a definitive legal manner, forcing him into the humiliating position of filing for commercial bankruptcy, a public admission of total financial failure that stripped away the last remaining shreds of his carefully cultivated masculine pride. He was a man who felt utterly cornered, stripped of his wealth, losing control over his estranged wife who was actively seeking independence, and facing the prospect of aging in a society where he felt increasingly marginalized and disrespected by the very family he believed owed him absolute loyalty. In his twisted, narcissistic worldview, his impending ruin was not the result of his own criminal choices, his volatile temper, or his reckless gambling, but rather the fault of those closest to him, his wife who refused to be controlled, her parents who supported her independence, and the societal structures that dared to challenge his patriarchal dominance. The festive holiday atmosphere of December 2014, with its cultural emphasis on family unity, joy, and financial abundance, served only to mock his personal devastation, sharpening his focus toward a dark, apocalyptic resolution where he would reclaim his power through an act of total, uncompromising violence. He began to look at the 9mm handgun not as a hidden liability, but as the ultimate instrument of equalization, a tool that would allow him to write his own horrific ending to a story of perceived betrayal, ensuring that if he was going to descend into total ruin, he would drag everyone who had ever crossed him down into the frozen earth alongside him. To understand the profound tragedy of the Edmonton massacre, one must look closely at the vibrant, innocent lives that were extinguished on that frozen December night, moving past the cold, clinical list of casualties to see the dreams, relationships, and human warmth that once filled the Clavatin home. At the center of this family structure was 35-year-old Thuy Tien Trung, a woman whose life was defined by an unyielding devotion to her children and a quiet, courageous determination to build a future independent of fear and control. Thuy Tien was known within her community as a remarkably hard-working and gentle soul, a mother who balanced the grueling demands of employment and childcare with an infectious warmth that radiated to everyone she met. She had spent years navigating the increasingly volatile and oppressive environment created by Fu Lam, enduring his unpredictable outbursts and financial recklessness while trying desperately to maintain a facade of stability for the sake of her young children. Her decision to distance herself from him and pursue a separate life was not an act of betrayal, as her abuser claimed, but a profound act of maternal love and self-preservation, a necessary step to ensure that her home would be a place of safety rather than a prison of anxiety. Those close to her recalled her bright smile, her culinary skills, and the meticulous care she took in organizing family gatherings, always prioritizing the happiness of others above her own comfort and working tirelessly to carve out a peaceful existence in her adopted Canadian home. Tragically bound to his mother's side in both life and death was 8-year-old Elvis Lam, a bright, energetic boy whose innocent laughter had once been the greatest source of joy within the household, a child whose entire world revolved around school, play, and the unconditional love of his maternal family. Elvis was a typical Canadian boy of his generation, navigating the dual worlds of his Vietnamese heritage at home and the bustling, multicultural environment of his elementary school, where he was remembered by teachers and classmates as a polite, kind-hearted student with a creative imagination. He loved the winter snow, the vibrant colors of the holiday season, and the simple pleasures of childhood, completely oblivious to the dark, financial and psychological storms that were brewing in the mind of the father who should have been his ultimate protector. To see Elvis was to see the future of the family, a young life bursting with potential, whose innocence stood in sharp, heartbreaking contrast to the bitter, destructive resentment of his father, making his inclusion in the slaughter one of the most unnatural and agonizing aspects of the entire tragedy. His mother had fought so hard to shield him from the toxic dynamics of her past relationship, enveloping him in a protective cocoon of love alongside his extended family, ensuring that his days were filled with warmth, education, and the gentle guidance necessary to grow into a good man. The foundational pillars of this extended family were Thuy Tien's parents, 55-year-old Van Dang Trung and 55-year-old Thai Dao Le, a devoted couple who had migrated to Canada to support their children and witness the flourishing of their grandchildren. Anchoring the household with traditional values of respect, resilience, and unconditional familial solidarity. Van Dang and Thai Dao were the quiet patriarch and matriarch of the home, individuals who had survived the immense, historic hardships of post-war migration and worked tirelessly throughout their adult lives to secure a foothold of peace and prosperity in Alberta. In the Vietnamese-Canadian diaspora, grandparents like Van Dang and Thai Dao played a crucial, indispensable role, often managing the domestic household, cooking traditional meals, and instilling cultural heritage in the younger generation while their adult children worked long hours to pay mortgages and build businesses. They were a constant, soothing presence in the Clavatin home, offering a sanctuary of wisdom and stability for Thuy Tien and young Elvis, and their presence in the house during the holidays was a testament to the deep bonds of love that united the generations. Their lives were defined by sacrifice, having left behind their familiar homeland so that their daughters and grandchildren could walk on streets free from conflict and oppression, never imagining that the ultimate threat to their survival would come from within their own domestic circle. Carried by a man they had once welcomed into their family. Adding to the devastating scale of the loss inside the residence was Thuy Tien's younger sister, 33-year-old Ton Ha Thai Trung, and her beautiful 3-year-old daughter, Valentina Nguyen, whose lives were intertwined with Thuy Tien's in a bond of sisterhood and shared motherhood that was supposed to last a lifetime. Ton Ha Thai was a vibrant young woman who shared her sister's industrious spirit and deep devotion to family, possessing a bright future that was closely linked to the collective success of the Trung household. Her daughter, Valentina, was a precious, wide-eyed toddler who brought an immense sense of wonder and playfulness to the home, her small footsteps and baby talk filling the rooms with a pure, unadulterated joy that momentarily pushed away the lingering anxieties of the past. On that fateful winter night, Ton Ha Thai and little Valentina were simply staying at the house to enjoy the festive holiday atmosphere and the comforting company of their closest relatives, seeking to celebrate the impending arrival of a new year surrounded by the people who loved them most. The bond between the two sisters was legendary among their acquaintances, characterized by mutual support, shared dreams for their children, and a commitment to helping each other navigate the complexities of life in a new country. A beautiful relationship that was brutally cut short by a killer who viewed their familial solidarity as an existential threat to his own absolute authority. Also present in the northern Edmonton home on that catastrophic evening was 41-year-old Viet Nguyen, a man whose presence in the house underscored the open, welcoming nature of the Trung family, who frequently extended their hospitality to friends and acquaintances within the close-knit community. Viet Nguyen was a respected member of the local circle, a man who had his own network of friends, professional commitments, and dreams, and who happened to be visiting the residence during a period traditionally reserved for socialization, rest, and the strengthening of community ties between the holidays. His inclusion in the massacre was a cruel, random twist of fate, a consequence of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the path of a remorseless killer who made no distinctions between his primary targets and those who simply witnessed his arrival. Viet's life, filled with its own unique history, struggles, and triumphs, was extinguished with the same cold detachment that Lam applied to his own family, leaving behind a separate circle of grieving relatives and friends who were left to grapple with the unfathomable reality of his sudden, violent absence. His death highlighted the indiscriminate, chaotic nature of Lam's rage, proving that once the threshold of violence had been crossed, the perpetrator was determined to leave no survivors within the walls of the Clavatin home, transforming a social visit into a fatal encounter that would forever link his name to one of Canada's darkest days. Far across the city, the final innocent life to be claimed by this synchronized campaign of terror belonged to 37-year-old Cindy Duong, a remarkable mother of 3 children whose life was rooted in faith, community service, and an absolute devotion to her husband and family in southwestern Edmonton. Cindy was a beloved, active member of her local church and neighborhood, recognized by all who knew her as a beacon of kindness, positivity, and grace, a woman who dedicated her time to nurturing her children and supporting community initiatives with a generous spirit. Her home in the Haddow neighborhood was a place of laughter, academic achievement, and spiritual grounding, a safe environment that she and her husband had carefully cultivated to shield their children from the harsher realities of the world. Unlike the victims in the Clavatin house, Cindy had no personal relationship with Fu Lam, no involvement in his domestic disputes, and no knowledge of the dark, financial abyss into which he had fallen. She was a completely detached, innocent party whose life was stolen simply because of a historical, financial grievance Lam held against her father. The sheer injustice of her death, executed in her own home in front of her beloved children, sent shockwaves of grief and horror through her church congregation and the wider Edmonton community, illustrating the terrifying, far-reaching ripples of a domestic dispute that had breached its boundaries to claim a woman whose life was an exemplar of peace, love, and community devotion. The deep, freezing darkness of the early morning hours of December 29, 2014, held the quiet neighborhood of Clavatin in an absolute, icy paralysis as the temperature plummeted far below zero. Inside the two-story house on 180th Avenue, the warmth of the heating system hummed softly against the bitter cold outside, a comforting and gentle backdrop to the rhythmic breathing of a family completely immersed in deep, peaceful sleep. At approximately 3:45 in the morning, the heavy silence of the home was broken by the muffled, deliberate entry of Fu Lam, who moved through the shadows with the terrifying familiarity of a man who knew every floorboard, every corner, and every vulnerability of the domestic sanctuary. In his pocket was a loaded, black 9mm handgun, an illegal weapon kept hidden for years for this exact moment of ultimate retribution, its cold steel reflecting the faint, colored holiday lights filtering through the frosted windows. He climbed the stairs with a predatory slow pace, his heart hardened against the innocent lives sleeping just behind the bedroom doors, driven by a narcissistic obsession to completely erase the family he believed had disrespected his authority and orchestrated his financial ruin. The absolute lack of forced entry or sudden noise allowed him to reach the inner sanctum of the household entirely unnoticed, positioned like a ghost of total destruction at the thresholds of those who had once looked to him for protection. The slaughter began with a sudden, deafening violence that ruptured the silence of the master bedroom, where 35-year-old Thuy Tien Trung lay sleeping, completely unaware that her journey toward independence was about to be brutally cut short. Without a single word of confrontation, Fu Lam raised the weapon and pulled the trigger, the explosive flash of the muzzle illuminating the dark room for a fraction of a second as the bullet tore through the air with lethal precision. Thuy Tien had no time to scream, no time to plead for her life, or to reach out for the children she had worked so hard to protect, her life force escaping into the heavy air of the room as the echo of the gunshot rattled the window panes. Moving with an unnatural, mechanical efficiency, Lam did not hesitate or pause to look at the devastation he had caused. Instead, he immediately turned his attention to the other occupants of the house who were just beginning to stir in confusion and terror from the sudden, thunderous sound. He entered the adjacent rooms where 8-year-old Elvis Lam, his own flesh and blood, lay tucked beneath his winter blankets, alongside his grandparents, Van Dang Trung and Thai Dao Le, who had spent their entire lives surviving hardships only to face their ultimate end at the hands of their son-in-law. One by one, with a chilling detachment that defied all human comprehension, Lam fired into the darkness, targeting the heads and chests of his victims as they lay trapped in their beds, ensuring that none would survive to bear witness to his monstrous actions. The terrifying rampage continued through the upper level of the house as 33-year-old Ton Ha Thai Trung and 41-year-old Viet Nguyen were systematically executed before they could fully comprehend the nightmare that had breached their sanctuary. In the corner of one room, 3-year-old Valentina Nguyen was silenced in her bed, her innocent life stolen in an instant by a man completely consumed by an apocalyptic rage that left no room for mercy or paternal instinct. Within a matter of mere minutes, the vibrant, loving household had been transformed into a silent, blood-soaked tomb, the air thick with the acrid, burning scent of gunpowder and the heavy, metallic odor of sudden death. Yet, amidst this absolute exhibition of depravity, a bizarre and chilling psychological anomaly occurred. Lam stood over the cribs of his 1-year-old daughter and his 8-month-old niece, looking down at the tiny innocent children who had somehow slept through the carnage or were staring up at him in wide-eyed confusion. For reasons known only to his twisted mind, he chose to spare these 2 infants, intentionally walking past their beds without raising his weapon, leaving them entirely alone in a house filled with the lifeless bodies of their entire maternal family. He stayed inside the residence for several hours, surrounded by the horrific results of his handiwork, calmly organizing his thoughts and packing his things as the morning sun slowly began to rise over the frozen landscape of northern Edmonton. At approximately 10 o'clock in the morning, with the bright winter sun reflecting off the pristine snowdrifts outside, Fu Lam walked out of the Clavatin house, carefully carrying the 2 spared infants in his arms as if he were an ordinary, doting father running a mundane weekend errand. He drove his dark sport utility vehicle through the quiet suburban streets, arriving at the home of an acquaintance where he casually dropped the children off, offering a vague, fabricated explanation for his sudden need for childcare before disappearing back into the city grid. For the next several hours, Lam navigated the streets of Edmonton like a ticking time bomb, his mind focused entirely on the final, unresolved grievance of his life. A financial resentment that had festered for years against an individual completely disconnected from his immediate domestic struggles. At 6:52 in the evening, as darkness once again claimed the city, he pulled his vehicle up to a modern, well-lit home in the affluent southwest neighborhood of Haddow, his hand gripping the same warm 9mm handgun that had already claimed 7 lives earlier that day. He walked up to the front door and forced his way inside, instantly confronting 37-year-old Cindy Duong, a devoted mother of 3 who was simply engaged in her evening routine, completely unaware of the monstrous presence that had just crossed her threshold. The confrontation in the Haddow kitchen was swift, terrifying, and completely devoid of human empathy, executed in the direct presence of Cindy's young children who could only watch in paralyzed horror as the nightmare unfolded before their eyes. Lam was not there to negotiate or to speak, he was there to inflict the ultimate pain on Cindy's father, who was not present at the home, by destroying the most precious thing in the man's life. He raised the pistol and fired a single, fatal shot into Cindy Duong, her body collapsing onto the clean kitchen floor as the screams of her children echoed fruitlessly against the walls of the suburban residence. Without a single look back at the traumatized family or the woman he had just murdered in cold blood, Lam turned on his heel and walked calmly back out into the freezing night, the snow crunching softly beneath his boots as he entered his vehicle and sped away into the dark. He drove 30 kilometers northeast toward the industrial town of Fort Saskatchewan, his mind completely settled on the final chapter of his violent campaign, leaving behind a trail of unprecedented devastation that stretched across the entire length of the city. A synchronized sequence of domestic and targeted terror that would forever change the history of Edmonton. The chilling winter air of southwest Edmonton was suddenly punctuated by the frantic, terrified screams of children emanating from a beautiful, modern home in the Haddow neighborhood at approximately 6:52 on the evening of December 29th. Within minutes, the flashing red and blue emergency lights of the Edmonton Police Service sliced through the dark suburban night, their tires crunching heavily on the hard-packed snow as first responders rushed toward the scene of what they initially believed to be a localized, isolated shooting. Upon breaching the front door, officers were met with an atmosphere of chaotic grief and absolute terror, the young children of 37-year-old Cindy Duong weeping uncontrollably in a kitchen that had just become a stage for cold-blooded execution. On the floor lay Cindy, her body entirely still, the victim of a single, devastating gunshot wound to the upper body that had stolen her life in a matter of heartbeats before she could even comprehend the nature of the threat. Homicide detectives arrived shortly thereafter, meticulously securing the perimeter, documenting the placement of a single spent 9mm casing on the pristine floor, and beginning the agonizing process of interviewing the traumatized young witnesses who could only describe a dark-clothed, middle-aged Asian man who had entered like a phantom and left without saying a word. As the forensic team worked under the harsh glare of camera flashes to preserve every microscopic piece of fiber and DNA evidence, the police database was queried for any registered vehicles or known individuals matching the vague description, yet at this early stage, the true, sprawling scale of the night's horrors remained completely hidden from the investigators. While the primary investigation was concentrated on the heartbreaking scene in Haddow, an entirely separate and seemingly unrelated concern was developing on the opposite side of the city in the northern suburban enclave of Clavatin. At 8:28 that same evening, a frantic call was placed to the police non-emergency line by extended relatives of Fu Lam, who expressed deep, agonizing anxiety regarding his recent, highly unstable mental state and alarming, cryptic statements he had made about ending his own life. Relatives explained to the dispatcher that Lam was facing an imminent financial collapse, that his marriage had completely disintegrated, and that his behavior over the past 48 hours had grown increasingly erratic, leading them to fear that he might be in the process of committing suicide. A standard welfare check was dispatched, and patrol officers arrived at the two-story house on 180th Avenue, pulling up to a residence that was completely dark, silent, and gave no outward indication that anyone was awake or active inside. The officers walked up the snow-covered driveway, noticing the absolute absence of Lam's known black sport utility vehicle, and knocked loudly on the front door, their breath pluming in the freezing air as they waited for a response that never came. Because the house was securely locked, showed no signs of forced entry, no immediate sounds of distress from within, and no visual evidence of an ongoing crime through the frosted windows. The officers were legally constrained from breaking down the door of a private residence based solely on a third-party report of suicidal ideation, leading them to clear the scene with the expectation that Lam was likely elsewhere in the city. The turning point that would transform a routine welfare check into the discovery of a historic atrocity occurred just after midnight on December 30th, when distraught family members provided the police with additional, highly alarming contextual details that suggested the danger inside the Clavatin home went far beyond a single man's suicidal thoughts. Recognizing the escalating gravity of the situation and the potential overlap with the ongoing homicide investigation in Haddow, a specialized tactical unit was dispatched back to the northern residence at 12:23 in the morning. Their expressions grim beneath their heavy winter gear as they prepared to force entry into the silent house. With a heavy, metallic thud, the front door was breached, and the officers stepped into an interior that was suffocatingly warm, still, and heavy with a dense, metallic aroma that instantly triggered the survival instincts of every veteran law enforcement officer present. Flashlights were clicked on, their powerful LED beams cutting through the absolute darkness of the hallway, casting elongated, dancing shadows against the walls as the entry team began a systematic, room-by-room sweep of the residence. What they encountered as they moved deeper into the home was a scene of such overwhelming, calculated depravity that it defied the boundaries of human imagination and left even the most hardened forensic investigators paralyzed with a deep, sickening horror. In the master bedroom, the flashlight beams settled on the pale, lifeless form of 35-year-old Thuy Tien Trung, caught entirely off guard and executed in her bed, the surrounding sheets heavily stained with the unmistakable crimson testament of sudden, violent trauma. As the team moved from one bedroom to the next, the body count rose with a terrifying, rhythmic predictability, revealing the bodies of 8-year-old Elvis Lam, his grandparents Van Dang Trung and Thai Dao Le, his aunt Ton Ha Thai Trung, and a family friend, Viet Nguyen. All bearing the signature marks of close-range gunshot wounds. The absolute pinnacle of the nightmare was realized when investigators illuminated the small, fragile form of 3-year-old Valentina Nguyen, her life stolen with the same precise, remorseless malice that had been applied to the adults, rendering the entire upper floor of the house a vertical graveyard of an entire extended family tree. The air inside the home felt ancient and stagnant, punctuated only by the crackle of police radios as the frantic, emotionally strained voices of the officers confirmed the presence of 7 distinct homicides within a single dwelling. Forensic technicians soon descended upon the Clavatin house, wearing white protective suits that contrasted sharply with the deep pools of blood, as they began the monumental task of recovering spent 9mm bullet casings, analyzing blood spatter patterns, and tracing the trajectory of each round to reconstruct the exact mechanics of the slaughter. As the morning sun began to cast a pale, weak light over the frozen landscape of Edmonton, the dual investigation teams worked at a feverish, desperate pace, rapidly connecting the dots between the single homicide in Haddow and the mass slaughter in Clavatin through ballistics evidence and vehicle descriptions that pointed squarely to a single, monstrous perpetrator, Fu Lam. The city was immediately placed on a state of high alert, with tactical units and covert surveillance vehicles flooding the major thoroughfares in a desperate, province-wide manhunt for the black sport utility vehicle before the armed and highly dangerous suspect could claim any more innocent lives. At 2:20 in the morning, a breakthrough occurred when an eagle-eyed patrol officer spotted the targeted black SUV parked silently outside a modest commercial strip in the town of Fort Saskatchewan, approximately 30 kilometers northeast of the city. The vehicle was parked directly in front of the VN Express restaurant, a Vietnamese eatery where Lam was known to have an equity stake and keys for late-night maintenance work, its windows heavily frosted over from the extreme cold, suggesting it had been sitting idle for several hours. The area was instantly cordoned off by heavily armed tactical officers, sharpshooters taking up positions on adjacent rooftops while crisis negotiators attempted to establish contact with anyone inside the darkened restaurant, the entire scene enveloped in a tense, claustrophobic standoff as dawn approached. At exactly 8:45 on the morning of December 30th, after hours of fruitless attempts to communicate and believing that the suspect posed an imminent threat to the community if left contained inside, the tactical unit used a specialized explosive charge to breach the glass entrance of the VN Express restaurant. Officers flooded the dining area with weapons raised, moving past the neatly arranged tables and chairs into the deep shadow of the kitchen and back storage rooms, their boots squeaking loudly on the cold tile floors as they searched for the killer. In a rear room, surrounded by the mundane supplies of a restaurant business, they found the lifeless body of Phu Lam, slumped over from a single, self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, the stolen black 9mm handgun still clutched near his cold hand. The immediate threat to the public was finally over, but as the investigators stood in the silent restaurant looking down at the coward who had chosen to escape earthly justice, the sheer weight of the tragedy began to truly settle over the city, leaving an entire nation to grapple with the unfathomable reality of 8 innocent lives stolen in a single night of unprecedented domestic fury. With the discovery of the killer's lifeless body inside the darkened kitchen of the VN Express restaurant, the immediate tactical threat to the citizens of Alberta had evaporated, but for the homicide detectives assigned to the case, the true investigative labor was only just beginning. In the high-stakes realm of true crime investigations, the death of a primary suspect does not signal the closure of a file, rather, it shifts the focus of the police apparatus toward reconstructing every minute detail of the timeline, exploring potential accomplices, and ruling out alternative theories that might suggest a wider conspiracy. As the forensic teams continued to process the separate crime scenes in Clavatin, Haddau, and Fort Saskatchewan, senior investigators gathered at the Edmonton Police Headquarters to piece together the chaotic jigsaw puzzle of Phu Lam's final hours, intentionally looking for any anomalies that did not fit the narrative of a solitary, domestic rampage. A primary area of intense focus during the initial 48 hours was the mysterious presence of 41-year-old Viet Nguyen at the Clavatin residence, an individual whose relationship with the family was not immediately clear to the outside world, sparking initial theories that the massacre might have been a targeted hit related to organized crime or the illicit drug trade. Given Phu Lam's documented criminal history dating back to 1987, which included significant ties to drug trafficking and violent offenses, detectives had to aggressively pursue the hypothesis that the slaughter was not merely an escalation of domestic abuse, but perhaps a lethal retributive strike by a criminal syndicate or a drug debt collection gone horribly wrong. This organized crime angle gained temporary traction among the investigative task force as they examined the precision with which the victims in the northern home had been executed while they slept, a methodology that mirrored the cold, mechanical efficiency of professional contract killers. Detectives spent sleepless nights digging into Viet Nguyen's personal and financial background, tracing his phone records, interviewing his known associates, and attempting to determine if his presence in the house on 180th Avenue was the catalyst that brought destruction to the Trung family. Surveillance footage from businesses surrounding the Clavatin neighborhood was painstakingly reviewed to see if any secondary vehicles had escorted Lam's black sport utility vehicle, or if unidentified individuals had been spotted lurking near the property in the days leading up to the massacre. Rumors began to circulate within the local community and media outlets that the family had been caught in the crossfire of an international drug feud, a narrative that threatened to overshadow the reality of the domestic terror the victims had endured and caused immense distress to the surviving extended family members. Every lead pointing toward a broader underworld conspiracy was meticulously catalogued and investigated, forcing detectives into deep, frustrating avenues of inquiry that ultimately began to lead into definitive investigative dead ends as the financial and forensic realities of Fu Lam's personal life began to take center stage. As the financial analysis of Lam's accounts progressed, the theory of a sophisticated, organized crime hit began to crumble under the weight of a far more pathetic and domestic reality, revealing a man who was completely drowning in a sea of personal debt and psychological deterioration. Forensic accountants uncovered a devastating paper trail showing that Lam's gambling addiction had completely eroded his financial stability, leading to astronomical debts owed to both legitimate institutions and underground loan sharks who operated within the margins of the city's nightlife. This realization briefly opened a secondary line of investigation. Had Lam been coerced into committing these murders by ruthless creditors who were using his family as leverage, or was he acting under the extreme duress of immediate physical elimination by those to whom he owed money? Detectives tracked down and interrogated known figures within the local underground gambling circuits, navigating a wall of silence and deception as they tried to ascertain if any explicit threats had been made against Lam or his estranged wife in the weeks preceding Christmas. However, despite the intense scrutiny applied to these criminal entities, no evidence emerged to suggest that anyone else had played a physical or planning role in the executions, forcing investigators to conclude that Lam's financial ruin had acted not as an external command, but as an internal psychological accelerant that warped his mind into a state of absolute, homicidal narcissism. Simultaneously, investigators had to rigorously examine the timeline surrounding the murder of 37-year-old Cindy Duong in the Haddao neighborhood, a scene that initially appeared to be a completely random act of violence detached from the domestic slaughter on the other side of Edmonton. The lack of any direct, personal connection between Cindy Duong and Fu Lam initially led detectives to investigate whether the killer had mistaken her home for another target, or if he had completely lost all rationality and was simply embarking on a random, citywide killing spree. This theory of indiscriminate madness was a terrifying prospect for the city, suggesting that any citizen could have crossed paths with the black SUV and met a similar fate on that frozen evening. To resolve this ambiguity, a specialized team of detectives was assigned to look into the history of the Haddao property and the extended genealogy of the Duong family, searching for any microscopic point of intersection with the perpetrator. It was during this painstaking deep dive into historical civil court records, property deeds, and old police reports that investigators finally hit upon a bitter, decades-old financial dispute between Fu Lam and a senior member of Cindy Duong's family. A grievance that had absolutely nothing to do with Cindy herself, but had remained preserved in the amber of Lam's resentful mind as a debt of honor that required blood payment. This revelation effectively closed the door on the theories of a random rampage or an organized crime conspiracy, narrowing the scope of the investigation back to the terrifyingly intimate confines of a single man's domestic tyranny and personal failures. The investigation had to confront the frustrating realization that there were no shadowy accomplices to track down, no international drug cartels to dismantle, and no hidden criminal masterminds who had pulled the strings from afar. The monster was entirely self-contained. A domestic abuser who had utilized an illegal, stolen weapon to execute a meticulously planned vendetta against those he believed had stripped him of his wealth and masculinity. The dead ends and false leads that detectives navigated during those intense, sleepless days were not a waste of effort, but a necessary process to ensure that the integrity of the final case file was absolute. Leaving no room for lingering doubts or unanswered questions about why 8 innocent people had been stolen from the world. As the investigative focus shifted from searching for external suspects to finalizing the psychological profile of the deceased killer, the absolute tragedy of the case became even more profound. Demonstrating how the systemic failures of the past and the hidden nature of domestic violence had allowed a single, deeply flawed individual to orchestrate a historic catastrophe entirely on his own. The definitive breakthrough that permanently consolidated the sprawling, multi-jurisdictional investigation into a singular, undeniable narrative of domestic vengeance came from the meticulous work of the Digital Forensics Unit and the ballistics experts working within the sterile laboratories of the Edmonton Police Service. While patrol officers and community members were still reeling from the immediate shock of the discoveries, tech specialists successfully bypassed the security protocols on Fu Lam's personal cell phone and home computer. unlocking a digital goldmine of premeditation that shattered any remaining theories of a sudden, spontaneous psychotic break. Investigators discovered a series of heavily encrypted messages, search histories, and digital notes dating back several weeks before the massacre, revealing that Lam had been methodically tracking the daily routines, work schedules, and movements of his estranged wife, Thuy Tien Trung, and her extended family members. Even more chillingly, the digital forensics team recovered a deleted file that contained a detailed, handwritten manifest of grievances, a bitter, narcissistic diatribe where Lam explicitly laid out his feelings of emasculation, his fury over the pending bankruptcy, and his absolute refusal to allow Thuy Tien to live a life free of his patriarchal control. This digital blueprint proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that the window of time between 3:45 and 8 o'clock on the morning of December 29th was not a chaotic blur of passion, but the cold execution of an administrative plan Lam had spent months refining in the dark corners of his ruined mind. Simultaneously, the forensic ballistics laboratory delivered the irrefutable physical link that tied the separate geographic locations, the Clavatan home, the Haddow residence, and the VN Express restaurant, into a tight, unbroken loop of physical evidence. Technicians analyzing the single spent 9mm casing recovered from the kitchen floor where Cindy Duong was murdered confirmed that the unique microscopic striations, firing pin impressions, and breech face marks were an identical match to the casings recovered from the beds of the 7 victims in northern Edmonton. Furthermore, the rifling characteristics on the bullets extracted during the subsequent autopsies of all 8 victims proved they had all traveled through the exact same barrel, that of the stolen 9mm handgun found clutched in Phu Lam's hand inside the Fort Saskatchewan restaurant. This ballistics breakthrough effectively eliminated any lingering legal ambiguity, providing a level of scientific certainty that would have been completely unassailable in a court of law, proving that one man, wielding one specific weapon, was solely responsible for the entirety of the carnage that had paralyzed the province of Alberta. The final piece of the investigative breakthrough fell into place when detectives located and interviewed the close acquaintance to whom Phu Lam had delivered the 2 spared infants at approximately 10 o'clock on the morning of December 29th. This witness, who had been completely unaware of the horror that had occurred just hours prior, provided a chilling, first-hand account of Lam's demeanor that stunned even the most hardened homicide investigators. The witness described Lam as remarkably calm, collected, and polite, showing no signs of physical agitation, bloodstains, or emotional distress as he handed over his 1-year-old daughter and 8-month-old niece along with a bag of diapers and formula. Lam had calmly stated that he had an urgent, unexpected business matter to attend to across the city and needed someone he trusted to watch the children for the remainder of the day, a mundane lie delivered with a level of sociopathic composure that allowed him to walk away unnoticed. This testimonial evidence was crucial because it definitively established Lam's capacity for rational thought, deception, and deliberate decision-making in the direct aftermath of murdering 7 people, completely dismantling any potential defense of legal insanity or drug-induced delirium. With the digital timeline established, the ballistics matches confirmed, and the witness testimonies secured, the investigative task force was able to answer the most haunting question that had plagued the city. Why did he spare the 2 infants while executing a 3-year-old child? Through the synthesis of the digital evidence and the psychological profiling conducted by behavioral analysts, it became clear that Lam's violence was entirely dictated by a warped sense of ownership and targeted retribution. The 3-year-old Valentina Nguyen was old enough to recognize him, old enough to embody the familial lineage he sought to destroy, and present in a bed alongside the adults he actively hated. Whereas the 2 infants were viewed in his narcissistic mind as tabulae rasa innocent extensions who possessed no memory of his failures and no capacity to judge his upcoming actions. Sparing them was not an act of genuine mercy, but a calculated, theatrical gesture designed to control the narrative of his crime, ensuring that even in his final act of total destruction, he retained the absolute power to decide who lived and who died based entirely on his personal whims. This breakthrough marked the formal conclusion of the active investigation, transitioning the case from a frantic search for answers into a monumental, somber documentation of an absolute tragedy, leaving the city with a complete, terrifying picture of the monster that had walked among them. In the unique and harrowing context of the Edmonton family massacre of December 2014, the conventional trajectory of the justice system, characterized by a grand courthouse trial, the dramatic presentation of evidence before a jury, and the formal reading of a lifetime prison sentence, was completely denied to the surviving family members and the public. Because Fu Lam chose to turn his stolen 9mm weapon upon himself inside the darkened storage room of the VN Express restaurant, there was no living defendant to stand in the prisoner's dock, no defense attorneys to spin complex legal justifications, and no judge to hammer down a gavel of state-sanctioned retribution. This absolute absence of a formal trial created a profound, hollow vacuum in the legal landscape of Alberta, forcing the justice system to adapt its mechanisms to provide accountability and answers through an exhaustive, public fatality inquiry rather than a criminal prosecution. In the years following the tragedy, this specialized legal proceeding functioned as a surrogate courtroom, where senior prosecutors, forensic pathologists, police commanders, and domestic violence experts were called to the stand to testify under oath before a provincial judge, transforming the sterile courtroom into a site of intense institutional scrutiny. The primary objective of this public inquiry was not to determine guilt, which had already been scientifically and forensically established beyond any doubt, but to aggressively dissect the systemic failures, legislative loopholes, and missed interventions that had allowed a known violent offender to remain free to execute his apocalyptic plan. The proceedings of the inquiry exposed a devastating chronicle of institutional missed opportunities and systemic gaps that left the family members in attendance weeping openly in the gallery as the details of Fu Lam's historical interactions with the law were read into the record. Legal analysts and investigators focused intensely on the 2012 domestic violence arrest, where Lam had explicitly threatened to murder Thuy Tien Trung and her entire family, a documented warning sign that should have triggered maximum state intervention and permanent protective monitoring. The courtroom heard testimony regarding how the initial, severe criminal charges had been systematically degraded through the standard plea bargaining process, a legal compromise driven by a combination of evidentiary challenges, victim intimidation, and a cultural barrier that made it immensely difficult for Thuy Tien to navigate the complex, intimidating structure of Western Canadian courts. Experts on domestic abuse testified that the dismissal or reduction of those charges effectively sent a lethal message of empowerment to the abuser, signaling to Lam that his domestic tyranny could be maintained without facing substantial incarceration or loss of liberty. The inquiry scrutinized the absolute lack of communication between the family law courts handling the couple's bitter separation and the criminal justice system that possessed the records of Lam's volatile criminal history. A bureaucratic disconnect that left the victims completely exposed while the killer's financial and psychological state collapsed into bankruptcy. Furthermore, the legal inquiry forced a critical, painful examination of the legislative boundaries governing police authority during welfare checks, specifically analyzing the actions of the patrol officers who knocked on the door of the Clavatin home at 8:28 on the night of December 29. The courtroom became a forum for intense debate as police legal counsel defended the officers' decision not to force entry at that time, explaining that under the existing Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, law enforcement cannot breach a private dwelling based solely on a report of suicidal ideation without visible, immediate signs of an ongoing crime or distress. This legal reality was a bitter pill for the surviving community to swallow, as it meant that the 7 bodies lay inside the darkened house for hours while the law technically protected the property rights of the dwelling. A stark illustration of how the rigid parameters of constitutional law can sometimes clash with the frantic, real-time necessity of life-saving intervention. The presiding judge meticulously reviewed the timeline, the ballistics reports, and the testimony of the medical examiners, who ultimately concluded that all 7 occupants of the Clavatin home had already been killed hours before that first police knock, offering a somber, devastating comfort that no amount of forced entry at 8 o'clock that evening could have altered the fate of the victims. The final report issued by the fatality inquiry did not end with a prison sentence, but with a series of sweeping, aggressive recommendations aimed at fundamentally rewriting the provincial protocols surrounding domestic violence, illegal firearm tracking, and cultural outreach within immigrant communities. The judge utilized the final memorandum to demand the creation of integrated threat assessment teams that would bridge the gap between criminal courts, social services, and localized cultural organizations. Ensuring that high-risk domestic situations are monitored by specialists who understand the unique pressures of honor, shame, and isolation that prevent victims from seeking help. While this administrative conclusion lacked the visceral satisfaction of seeing a monster led away in handcuffs to serve consecutive life terms, it represented the only form of institutional justice available to the memory of the Trung, Le, Nguyen, and Duong families, a systemic reckoning that forced the province of Alberta to look into the mirror and acknowledge its failures. The legacy of this legal battle was not found in a prison cell, but in the permanent changes made to protective legislation and the collective vow of a legal system that the names of those 8 innocent souls would serve as the foundational catalyst for a more vigilant, protective, and empathetic society. The profound, heavy silence that settled over the city of Edmonton in the wake of the December 2014 family massacre remains an indelible, solemn marker in the history of Western Canada. A tragedy that permanently altered the collective consciousness of a community and left a scar that time can never truly heal. Years have passed since that freezing winter night when 8 innocent lives were violently uprooted, yet the memory of their warmth, their struggles, and their untimely demises continues to echo through the quiet suburban streets of Clavatin and Haddau, serving as a harrowing testament to the devastating intersection of unchecked domestic tyranny and systemic vulnerability. The pristine white snow that blankets Alberta every December no longer represents merely a serene holiday landscape. For those who survived the ripple effects of this catastrophe, it serves as a perennial, stark reminder of the fragile boundary between domestic sanctuary and unimaginable horror. The names of Thuy Tien Trung, Elvis Lam, Van Dang Trung, Thai Dao Le, Ton Thai Trung, Valentina Nguyen, Viet Nguyen, and Cindy Duong have been permanently etched into the sorrowful archive of the nation, demanding that we look beyond the sensationalized headlines of their deaths to honor the full, vibrant realities of the lives they lived and the futures that were stolen from them. As the incense smoke slowly dissipated from the crowded halls of the Truc Lam Monastery during the massive communal memorial services, the tight-knit Vietnamese-Canadian diaspora was left to grapple with a deep, existential grief that forced a radical re-examination of cultural taboos, familial honor, and the hidden realities of domestic abuse within immigrant communities. For generations, the trauma of displacement and the immense pressure to project an image of successful integration had created a culture of silence surrounding domestic discord. An unspoken agreement that marital conflicts should be contained behind closed doors to protect the family name from public shame. This tragedy violently shattered that silence, forcing a painful but necessary awakening within the community to recognize that protecting an abuser's pride is a fatal enterprise that costs the lives of the most vulnerable. Grassroots organizations, cultural elders, and youth advocates across Alberta mobilized in the aftermath of the slaughter, breaking down the linguistic and psychological barriers that had long isolated victims from the protective mechanisms of the state, ensuring that no woman or child would feel entirely alone in the shadow of an aggressive partner. This shift toward open dialogue, collective vigilance, and the active dismantling of patriarchal entitlement stands as the true, enduring monument to the victims, an ongoing effort to transform an absolute catastrophe into a life-saving awakening for future generations. The psychological profile of Phu Lam left behind by investigators serves as a chilling, cautionary blueprint of how toxic masculinity, compounded by financial ruin and a narcissistic refusal to accept accountability, can manifest as an apocalyptic force capable of destroying an entire family tree. He was a man who viewed his wife, his children, and his extended family not as independent human beings worthy of love and respect, but as personal property, extensions of his own fragile ego that he felt entitled to extinguish the moment they dared to step out of his control. His final, cowardly act of self-destruction inside the VN Express restaurant was the ultimate expression of his narcissism, a deliberate choice to evade earthly justice and deny his surviving relatives the closure of a trial, leaving the world to clean up the wreckage of his malice. This case forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that monsters do not always exist in the shadows of society. Sometimes, they sit at the head of the dinner table, driving dark sport utility vehicles through ordinary neighborhoods, hiding their escalating depravity beneath the mundane routines of working-class survival. To prevent the rise of such individuals, society must cultivate a heightened sensitivity to the early warning signs of coercive control, understanding that a threat to murder a family is never an idle expression of anger, but a literal declaration of intent that requires immediate, uncompromising intervention by both the community and the law. Ultimately, the story of the Edmonton family massacre is not merely a chronicle of death, but a profound call to empathy, systemic reform, and a collective refusal to let the memories of the innocent be consumed by the darkness of the crime that claimed them. The two infants who were miraculously spared on that terrifying night have grown into a completely new era, carrying with them an invisible, historic weight but also the resilient spirit of the maternal family that loved them so deeply before the storm arrived. We must ensure that the legacy of this tragedy is found not in the horrific details of the slaughter, but in the permanent changes made to protective legislation, the strengthening of social safety nets, and the unyielding commitment of neighbors to look out for one another behind the closed doors of our suburban sanctuaries. As the lights flicker across the quiet avenues of Edmonton each winter, they serve as a silent vigil for 8 beautiful souls who came to Canada seeking a peaceful life, a reminder that the pursuit of justice and the protection of the vulnerable is a continuous, daily responsibility that we owe to the past, the present, and the future. The conclusion of the formal inquiry and the implementation of provincial reforms did not signal a neat ending to the narrative of the Edmonton massacre, but rather initiated an ongoing, quiet struggle for long-term healing and structural permanence within the social systems of Alberta. Looking back from the perspective of over a decade later, the true impact of this tragedy is measured not by the immediate weight of the shockwaves it generated, but by the slow, deliberate cultural shifts that continue to redefine how domestic violence is handled in multicultural urban centers. The painful lessons extracted from the deaths of Thuy Tien Trung and her family have gradually institutionalized themselves within the standard operating procedures of regional law enforcement, where specialized cultural liaisons are now embedded directly into domestic crisis units to ensure that linguistic nuance and fear of community ostracization are never again used by an abuser as leverage to silence their victims. These interagency partnerships have successfully bridged the gap that previously existed between immigrant social networks and the Canadian legal apparatus, creating a safer, more accessible conduit for individuals who need to escape dangerous domestic situations before they reach a critical, lethal mass. The memory of the slaughter has therefore transformed from a static historical trauma into an active, protective shield, constantly reminding policymakers and social workers that the warning signs of extreme domestic abuse must be treated with the absolute gravity of an impending national emergency. This ongoing legacy of vigilance is particularly vital when analyzing the profound transformation that occurred within the educational and grassroots infrastructure of Edmonton, where the story of young Elvis Lam and tiny Valentina Nguyen inspired a comprehensive overhaul of youth advocacy and protective intervention protocols. Local schools and community centers across the province established dedicated awareness programs aimed at recognizing the subtle behavioral indicators of severe domestic stress in children, ensuring that the younger generation is not left to suffer in silence while their homes are turned into claustrophobic environments of terror. By educating teachers, coaches, and counselors on how to identify the silent calls for help from children caught in the crossfire of parental separation and financial collapse, the community has built a highly responsive net that proactively catches vulnerable youth before they can be harmed by the adults tasked with their care. These initiatives have effectively ensured that the short, vibrant lives of the children stolen on that frozen December night were not lost in vain, but instead became the foundational cornerstone for a more compassionate, observant, and interventionist educational system that prioritizes child safety above bureaucratic hesitation. The physical structures where these tragedies occurred have since passed into the hands of new occupants or been quieted by time. But the spiritual and social lessons woven into the fabric of the city ensure that the collective conscience of Edmonton remains permanently altered and deeply committed to the preservation of human life. In the final estimation, the endurance of this true crime narrative relies entirely on our collective willingness to speak the names of the victims with absolute clarity, ensuring that the sheer scale of Phu Lam's depravity does not overshadow the individual humanity, grace, and potential of the 8 souls he systematically extinguished. True justice for the Trung, Le, Nguyen, and Duong families is an ongoing process, a daily commitment lived out by the counselors who answer crisis hotlines, the police officers who execute high-risk welfare checks with renewed urgency, and the neighbors who refuse to look away when they suspect an individual is living in fear behind a closed suburban door. As the city of Edmonton continues to grow, welcoming new generations of immigrants who arrive with the same dreams of peace and prosperity that once fueled the victims of 2014, the story stands as a permanent, solemn guardrail. An enduring reminder of the responsibilities we bear toward one another in a civil society. The smoke of the memorial candles may have cleared and the immediate headlines have long faded into the archives, but the profound moral imperative of this case remains entirely undiminished, calling upon every citizen to stand as an active guardian of the vulnerable, a voice for the silenced, and a keeper of the sacred sanctuary that every human home is supposed to be. The deep-seated institutional shifts that occurred in the decade following the tragedy eventually paved the way for an even more profound, intimate transformation within the private sphere of the survivors, where the slow process of generational healing began to replace the immediate, paralyzing grip of terror. For the surviving children who were spared by Phu Lam on that horrific morning, the journey through adolescence and into early adulthood has been shaped by an extraordinary network of community support. A collective vow by extended relatives and family friends to surround them with an unyielding environment of emotional security and absolute love. These two individuals, now growing up in a vastly changed world, represent the ultimate triumph of life over the destructive, narcissistic legacy of their abuser, serving as living proof that the history of a family cannot be entirely dictated by an act of concentrated malice. The community has meticulously protected their privacy, shielding them from the invasive glare of true crime sensationalism, while simultaneously ensuring that they are fully aware of the beautiful, courageous characteristics of the mothers, grandparents, and siblings who loved them fiercely during their earliest days on Earth. This protective cocoon has allowed a new branch of the family tree to grow toward the light, deeply rooted in the resilience of their maternal heritage and entirely liberated from the shadow of the violence that attempted to consume their lineage. On a broader societal scale, the enduring impact of the Edmonton massacre has catalyzed a critical re-evaluation of how the media handles the reporting of mass casualty domestic homicides, shifting the journalistic paradigm away from the glorification of the perpetrator and toward a deep, respectful focus on the victims. In the immediate aftermath of 2014, media outlets frequently centered Phu Lam's face, his financial ruin, and his gambling addiction, inadvertently creating a narrative where the killer became the main protagonist of the tragedy while the victims were relegated to a tragic footnote. Today, Canadian journalism and true crime documentary formatting have evolved to actively reject this imbalance, intentionally minimizing the visibility of the murderer to ensure that the public memory is entirely populated by the dreams, achievements, and identities of the 8 innocent people who were lost. This ethical evolution in storytelling serves a vital preventative function, as it strips away the dark, theatrical notoriety that highly narcissistic, abusive individuals often seek when planning acts of catastrophic violence, sending a clear message that the state and the media will never allow a killer's name to outshine the memories of those they destroyed. The public record has been permanently corrected, ensuring that when future generations look back at this dark chapter in Alberta's history, they see a community that unified in grief, a legal system that reformed its loopholes, and a nation that refused to let the names of the victims be forgotten beneath the weight of the horror. Ultimately, as the timeline stretches further away from that frozen December night, the story of the Edmonton family massacre stands as a permanent, universal monument to human resilience and the absolute necessity of communal solidarity in the face of profound depravity. The collective trauma that once threatened to permanently fracture the local community has instead been forged into a lasting covenant of mutual protection, a shared social conscience that remains fiercely committed to the eradication of domestic tyranny in all its hidden forms. The memory of the Trung, Le, Nguyen, and Duong families is kept alive not through sterile monuments of cold stone, but through the active, daily choices of a society that chooses empathy over indifference, intervention over hesitation, and open dialogue over the dangerous illusions of domestic privacy. As the northern lights dance silently across the vast, dark sky of Alberta, casting their brilliant hues over the quiet suburban roofs of Edmonton, they serve as a beautiful, eternal vigil for the 8 souls who were stolen too soon, a reminder that even in the deepest, most freezing darkness of winter, the light of human love, memory, and justice can never be truly extinguished. Beyond the restructuring of media ethics and community support networks, the long-term historical analysis of the Edmonton massacre has forced a comprehensive re-evaluation of how municipal law enforcement manages the psychological toll inflicted upon its own frontline personnel during mass casualty events. The patrol officers and forensic specialists who stepped through the shattered doorway of the Clavatin home at 12:23 on the morning of December 30th were subjected to a level of concentrated, visceral horror that few human beings are ever equipped to process without enduring severe, lasting psychological repercussions. In the years following the tragedy, the Edmonton Police Service utilized this specific case file as a definitive catalyst to completely dismantle the archaic, stoic culture of silence that had traditionally governed the policing profession regarding post-traumatic stress and operational stress injuries. The organization recognized that the standard debriefing protocols of the past were entirely inadequate for handling the deep, emotional devastation experienced by first responders who had to systematically document the bodies of multiple young children executed inside their own beds. This structural awakening led to the permanent institutionalization of mandatory, long-term psychological monitoring and peer support networks for all homicide detectives and forensic technicians involved in the case, establishing a modern, empathetic model of occupational health care that has since been adopted by law enforcement agencies across the country. Consequently, the legacy of the Trung, Le, Nguyen, and Duong families has become deeply woven into the very fabric of how emergency personnel are protected and sustained in the line of duty, ensuring that the human cost of investigating such profound malice is acknowledged and mitigated with absolute professional seriousness. The officers who bore witness to the immediate aftermath of Phu Lam's depravity were not left to carry the heavy, silent weight of those images in isolation. Instead, their collective trauma became the driving force behind a new era of transparency and mental health advocacy within the Canadian justice system. This internal evolution underscores the reality that the ripples of a mass domestic homicide extend far beyond the immediate circle of blood relatives, permeating the institutional structures of the state and demanding a holistic, compassionate response that prioritizes the preservation of human sanity and dignity. By turning the agonizing lessons of the Clavatin crime scene into a proactive mechanism for healing and psychological resilience, the city of Edmonton ensured that the dark, destructive intent of the perpetrator was entirely denied its secondary objective of breaking the spirits of those tasked with upholding public order and justice. As the years continue to advance and the physical memory of 2014 recedes into the broader tapestry of municipal history, the ultimate significance of this true crime tragedy resides in its enduring power to command absolute, uncompromised vigilance from every tier of civil society. The narrative remains an open, vital text for criminologists, social workers, and citizens alike, a stark warning that the safety of our neighborhoods can never be taken for granted and that the hidden cry of a single abused individual must be amplified before it is permanently silenced. The quiet streets of Clavatin and Haddau, now home to new families and new generations of children playing in the winter snow, carry the invisible, sacred weight of this history not as a curse, but as a silent promise of protection. A collective vow that the community will never again allow the illusions of domestic privacy to shield a monster from the light of intervention. The 8 innocent souls who were lost on that freezing December night have found their permanent resting place in the affectionate, enduring memory of a nation that refused to let the horror of their deaths eclipse the beautiful, vibrant legacy of their lives. A legacy that continues to inspire love, unity, and a fierce, unyielding commitment to the preservation of human sanctuary. The continuous evolution of community-based vigilance in the wake of the Edmonton tragedy eventually expanded into the digital and technological realms, forcing a deep modernization of how threat assessments are conducted by specialized domestic violence units across North America. As forensic analysts and criminologists deeply studied the digital trail left behind on Phu Lam's personal devices, it became starkly apparent that the modern abuser utilizes a highly sophisticated arsenal of digital tracking, cyberstalking, and covert electronic harassment to isolate and terrorize their victims long before a physical weapon is ever drawn. In response to this chilling realization, the provincial government and local law enforcement developed cutting-edge digital threat matrix tools designed specifically to detect patterns of escalating electronic monitoring, financial tracking, and digital coercion within high-risk domestic relationships. Social workers and legal advocates were trained to aggressively investigate whether an estranged partner was monitoring cell phone locations, accessing private bank accounts, or utilizing smart home technology to maintain an oppressive, invisible grid of control over a victim seeking independence. By transforming the tragic digital blueprint of the 2014 massacre into a proactive diagnostic framework, the justice system finally began to catch up with the realities of modern domestic tyranny, providing advocates with the precise tools necessary to intervene and disrupt a killer's plans before they can transition from digital intimidation to physical execution. This technological advancement has fundamentally redefined the concept of public safety in the suburban landscape, ensuring that the invisible digital walls an abuser erects around a household are recognized as clear, unambiguous indicators of lethal intent that justify immediate state intervention. The silent, terrifying surveillance that Thuy Tien Trung endured in the weeks leading up to her death is no longer dismissed as minor, non-violent harassment. Instead, under the modernized judicial protocols inspired by her memory, such behavior is treated with the same legal severity as a physical assault, triggering immediate protective orders and the mandatory seizure of any registered or unregistered firearms associated with the suspect. This proactive legal stance has effectively dismantled the dangerous, archaic notion that law enforcement must wait for physical blood to be spilled before a domestic sanctuary can be actively protected, creating a much higher barrier of security for vulnerable families navigating the treacherous process of separation. The lessons of Clavatin have therefore become permanently institutionalized within the digital infrastructure of the state, serving as an automated, vigilant guardian that actively monitors the warning signs of escalating malice to ensure that no other family is left completely defenseless against a calculated, technological campaign of terror. Ultimately, as the passage of time further solidifies the place of the Edmonton family massacre within the broader history of Canadian jurisprudence, the true, enduring victory of the community lies in its absolute refusal to allow the memory of the victims to become a sterile, forgotten statistic. The names of the 8 innocent individuals who were stolen on that freezing December night continue to serve as a vibrant, living catalyst for compassion, driving a continuous cycle of educational funding, shelter expansion, and cultural outreach that directly saves lives every single day. The deep, agonizing sorrow that once threatened to completely paralyze the local diaspora has been successfully sublimated into an unyielding, generational commitment to human dignity, creating a society that is vastly more observant, empathetic, and protective than the one that existed before the storm. As the winter winds howl across the vast, snow-covered plains of Alberta, shaking the frosted windows of the quiet homes in Clavatin and Haddow, they no longer carry only the echo of a distant, unimaginable horror. Instead, they carry the profound, resonant promise of an entire city that has sworn a sacred oath to remember the past, to safeguard the vulnerable, and to ensure that the light of human sanctuary will forever burn bright against the deepest darkness. The structural transformation of public safety and digital threat monitoring initiated a profound secondary effect within the philosophical and architectural frameworks of urban housing developments across Western Canada, specifically influencing how future suburban neighborhoods were planned and constructed to enhance communal safety. Criminologists and urban planners specializing in crime prevention through environmental design began utilizing the specific geographic layout of the Clavatin and Haddow neighborhoods as critical case studies to understand how modern suburban architecture can inadvertently contribute to the isolation of domestic abuse victims. Investigators noted that the high, solid wooden fences, the deep setbacks of properties from the main roadways, and the heavy soundproofing materials designed to keep out the harsh Canadian winter also acted as acoustic and visual barriers that effectively sealed the domestic violence inside, preventing neighbors from hearing the initial signs of distress or witnessing the suspicious movements of a perpetrator. In the years following the 2014 tragedy, municipal planning committees in Edmonton and Calgary began implementing subtle but significant adjustments to subdivision regulations, encouraging design models that foster higher natural surveillance, better street visibility, and neighborhood layouts that naturally cultivate social cohesion and open communal interaction. This physical reimagining of the suburban environment represents a permanent, structural commitment to ensuring that the physical spaces where citizens live are inherently designed to prevent the isolation and quiet victimization of families, shifting the very geography of the city toward an ethos of collective care and shared responsibility. Consequently, the physical transformation of these residential spaces has embedded the memory of the Trung, Le, Nguyen, and Duong families directly into the bricks, mortar, and streets of the expanding metropolis, creating a silent architectural legacy of protection that watches over thousands of families who may never fully know the history of the soil beneath their homes. This integration of public safety into urban design underscores the reality that a society's response to profound depravity cannot be confined to the courtroom or the police station. It must permeate every aspect of how a community structures its daily existence. From the way a window faces the street to the width of a neighborhood sidewalk. By actively altering the physical parameters of the domestic sphere to reduce isolation and enhance community visibility, the city has created a structural deterrent against the hidden, unchecked expansion of domestic tyranny. Denying future abusers the absolute privacy they require to construct their dark, calculated campaigns of terror. The quiet crescents and manicured parks of modern Edmonton now carry this invisible, protective blueprint, serving as a physical manifestation of a city's determination to turn a historic atrocity into a permanent foundation for safe, connected, and vigilant neighborhoods. As the narrative of the Edmonton family massacre reaches its ultimate, comprehensive documentation within the annals of Canadian true crime, the final, most enduring revelation remains the absolute resilience of the human spirit when confronted with the deepest manifestations of human malice. The profound sorrow that gripped the nation in late December 2014 has not stagnated into a legacy of permanent despair. Instead, it has been systematically converted into a vibrant, multi-layered apparatus of legal reform, technological advancement, psychological healing, and community solidarity that actively protects the vulnerable every single day. The 8 innocent individuals who were lost on that freezing winter night are no longer defined by the horrific manner of their deaths, but by the massive, unstoppable wave of compassion and societal progress that their memories continue to inspire across the entire country. As the sub-zero winds of the northern prairies sweep across the frozen grid of Edmonton, rattling the glass of homes where families gather in warmth and safety, the echo of that dark night is entirely drowned out by the collective voice of a society that has sworn an eternal, unyielding oath to honor the past, to stand as a shield for the defenseless, and to ensure that the light of human sanctuary will never be extinguished by the darkness of a single man's rage. The profound architectural and environmental reflections that emerged from the Edmonton tragedy soon expanded into a vital dialogue regarding the availability and accessibility of specialized emergency shelters for families fleeing domestic abuse, particularly those within minority and immigrant populations. In the immediate aftermath of 2014, social justice advocates and municipal leaders across Alberta began a critical audit of the province's crisis infrastructure, revealing a desperate shortage of safe spaces that could accommodate large, multi-generational families or provide the specific cultural and linguistic support required by diverse communities. For many victims navigating an abusive household, the terrifying prospect of homelessness or being separated from their children and elderly parents acts as a massive, institutional barrier that forces them to remain within the orbit of a violent perpetrator. Recognizing this systemic deficit, a coordinated fundraising and legislative campaign was launched in Edmonton, culminating in the expansion of local women's shelters and the creation of dedicated, secure residential complexes designed specifically to house multi-generational immigrant families in moments of acute danger. These modern sanctuaries were constructed with high-level security systems, private family suites, and on-site legal and psychological counselors who possess a deep, nuanced understanding of the unique cultural pressures that victims face. providing an immediate and uncompromised avenue of escape that simply did not exist for Thuy Tien Trung and her family when they needed it most. By systematically removing the logistical and financial barriers to escape, these newly established crisis networks have directly intervened in thousands of high-conflict domestic situations over the past decade, effectively rewriting the outcomes of potential tragedies before they can escalate into physical violence. The legacy of the Clavatan and Had Dao victims is therefore alive within the quiet, secure hallways of these shelters, where mothers can look into the eyes of their children and know with absolute certainty that they are safe from the rage of an abuser. This monumental shift in how society funds and prioritizes emergency housing represents a profound collective acknowledgement that public safety is inextricably linked to the protection of the domestic sphere, and that a city's true strength is measured by its capacity to shield its most vulnerable members from harm. The heavy investments made into these protective environments have fundamentally transformed the social landscape of Western Canada, creating a robust, compassionate safety net that stands as a permanent deterrent against the isolated, unchecked expansion of domestic tyranny. As the comprehensive script of this historic case draws to its absolute conclusion, the narrative leaves an indelible mark on the consciousness of all who encounter it, serving as both a devastating chronicle of human loss and an inspiring testament to societal resilience. The 8 innocent individuals who were stolen on that freezing December night are no longer remembered merely as passive victims of a monstrous crime, but as the foundational catalysts for a sweeping, multi-layered revolution in law enforcement, technology, jurisprudence, architecture, and community care that continues to safeguard lives across the nation. The deep, winter chill of Alberta will always carry the solemn memory of the 2014 massacre, but that memory is now inextricably bound to an unyielding, generational promise of protection and unity. The light of the victims' lives, permanently preserved in the affectionate remembrance of a grateful and vigilant society, continues to burn bright against the darkest corners of human nature, ensuring that the sanctuary of the home remains a sacred, inviolable space of peace, love, and enduring safety for all. The structural expansion of emergency shelter infrastructure across Alberta eventually triggered a fundamental modernization in the way the Canadian federal government approaches the regulation and tracking of illegal firearms, particularly those utilized in acts of domestic violence. As ballistics and criminal intelligence investigators finalized the file on the 2014 massacre, the history of the murder weapon itself, a black 9mm handgun that had been reported stolen in another province nearly a decade prior, became a focal point for intense legislative debate in Ottawa. Lawmakers and gun control advocates pointed to the Edmonton case as a catastrophic example of how a firearm, once leaked into the underground market through theft, can remain a dormant, unregulated instrument of mass destruction for years before falling into the hands of a domestic abuser. This realization led to the implementation of more rigorous tracing protocols, increased penalties for the trafficking of stolen weapons, and the creation of specialized task forces aimed at disrupting the flow of illicit firearms into residential neighborhoods. By treating the presence of an illegal firearm in a household not merely as a regulatory infraction but as a primary indicator of potential mass homicide, the justice system tightened the perimeter around known abusers, creating a significant legal barrier that aggressively prevents individuals with histories of domestic violence from maintaining access to lethal force. This legislative evolution has institutionalized a culture of zero tolerance surrounding firearms within the context of domestic disputes across Western Canada, ensuring that when a report of marital bauhon or coercive control is made, the immediate removal of all weapons becomes a mandatory, non-negotiable step in the police response. The legal loopholes that allowed individuals like Phu Lam to retain access to hidden arsenals despite prior arrests have been systematically closed, replaced by a proactive judicial framework that prioritizes the immediate safety of the victims over the property rights of the accused. This robust legal stance serves as a direct, structural tribute to the memories of the 7 individuals executed in Clavatan and the mother taken in Had Dao, ensuring that their names are permanently associated with a safer, more vigilant nation that refuses to ignore the lethal potential of domestic escalation. The transformation of the country's firearm tracking network stands as a powerful testament to the reality that systemic change is often forged in the embers of unspeakable tragedy. forcing a society to continuously adapt its laws to protect its citizens from the malice of those who operate within the shadows of the domestic sphere. As this exhaustive exploration of the Edmonton family massacre reaches its final, definitive documentation, the overarching narrative transitions from a dark chronicle of loss into an enduring anthem of communal resilience, survival, and systematic progress. The profound sorrow that gripped the city in late December 2014 did not result in a legacy of permanent despair, rather, it catalyzed a comprehensive, multi-layered revolution that dismantled the dangerous illusions of domestic privacy to establish a society defined by collective care and unyielding vigilance. The 8 innocent individuals who were stolen on that freezing winter night continue to live on through every life saved by a modern shelter, every firearm seized by a proactive task force, and every immigrant family guided to safety by a culturally sensitive advocate. The biting wind of the Canadian prairies will always carry the solemn memory of that historic atrocity, but that memory is now completely enveloped in the warm, enduring promise of a community that has sworn a sacred oath to remember the past, to shield the defenseless, and to ensure that the light of human sanctuary will forever burn bright against the deepest darkness. The legislative transformations surrounding illicit firearms and domestic protection orders naturally extended into the realm of family law and civil court procedures across Alberta, fundamentally changing how custody disputes and asset liquidations are handled when there is a documented history of domestic bao-hon. In the years prior to the 2014 tragedy, the family court system and the criminal justice system operated in siloed bureaucratic spaces, meaning that a judge presiding over a bankruptcy proceeding or a divorce settlement was often completely blind to parallel police reports or criminal charges involving physical abuse and lethal threats. During the public inquiries into the Edmonton massacre, legal scholars aggressively pointed out that Phu Lam's impending financial ruin and his separation from Thuy Tien Trung were treated by civil courts as routine administrative matters rather than high-risk triggers for a catastrophic acts of retaliatory violence. This systemic blindness allowed the perpetrator to feel increasingly cornered by legal mandates, asset division, and debt collections, compounding his narcissistic rage in an unmonitored vacuum until he decided to execute his horrific final solution. In direct response to these findings, the provincial judiciary implemented a mandatory cross-referencing protocol, requiring all family and civil court judges to review a comprehensive criminal threat matrix before issuing rulings on divorce, property division, or bankruptcy when domestic abuse has been alleged. This critical legal integration ensures that whenever a domestic relationship is dissolved under the cloud of coercion or physical intimidation, the court treats the financial and legal triggers not as isolated economic transactions, but as highly volatile events that require active, state-monitored security measures. Protective services are now routinely coordinated with local law enforcement during the serving of separation papers or bankruptcy notices to high-risk individuals, creating a protective barrier around the victims during the most dangerous phases of a relationship's breakdown. By dismantling the bureaucratic walls that once separated the civil and criminal sectors of the law, the justice system has effectively closed a lethal loophole that Phu Lam exploited, ensuring that an abuser's financial desperation is recognized as an explicit warning sign of potential mass homicide. The memory of the Trung family is thus woven into the very mechanics of modern Canadian jurisprudence, serving as a permanent, systemic shield that proactively monitors the intersections of financial collapse and domestic tyranny to safeguard vulnerable lives before a crisis can transition into a slaughter. As this exhaustive, cinematic kitsch ban of the Edmonton family massacre reaches its final chapters of documentation, the narrative stands as a profound testament to a society's capacity to reconstruct its broken institutions in the wake of absolute darkness. The 8 innocent individuals whose lives were stolen on that freezing December night are no longer remembered merely as passive participants in a historic true crime tragedy, but as the foundational pillars of a sweeping social, legal, and technological revolution that continues to redefine the meaning of public safety across Canada. The deep sorrow that once paralyzed the city of Edmonton has been entirely sublimated into an unyielding, multi-layered apparatus of prevention, healing, and community care that actively protects thousands of families every single day. The freezing winds of the northern prairies will always carry the solemn memory of the 2014 massacre, But that memory is now inextricably bound to a sacred, generational promise of collective vigilance, ensuring that the light of human sanctuary will forever burn bright, safe, and inviolable against the deepest manifestations of human malice.